See, Orson Vane didn't even look at the children when he gave the order. See, he just flicked 2 fingers at the deputies the way a man flicks away a fly and said, "Take them." See, start with the eldest. That was it. No courtroom. See, no argument. 7 children, the youngest barely old enough to walk, and 1 exhausted mother who hadn't slept in 6 days, and the most powerful man in Ash Hollow dismissed all of them with 2 fingers and a bored expression. See, Martha Bellamy stepped in front of her son with nothing but her body. See, no weapon, no lawyer, no money, just 180 pounds of a woman who had already buried her husband and was not going to watch her family get auctioned off like livestock in the Colorado snow. See, and then the hoofbeats came. See, if a story like this speaks to something in you a mother's love, a man who surprised everyone, a family that refused to break, please subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. See, hit the like button and drop a comment with your city or country. See, I want to know how far this story has traveled. Don't miss what's coming, because what happens next changes everything. See, the notice had been nailed to the Bellamy door before sunrise. See, nobody knocked. Nobody warned her. Martha found it herself when she went to pull in the morning wood a single sheet of paper folded once, pinned with a nail so new it still smelled of iron. See, she stood on the porch in her husband's old coat, the one she'd been wearing since the funeral, because her own coat had gone to her eldest daughter in October when the cold came early, and she read it twice before the words fully reached her. See, debt collection and property seizure. Bellamy Homestead. See, by order of Vane Territorial Banking. Action to be carried out within 7 days. See, 7 days. She went back inside without the wood. See, the children were still sleeping, all 7 of them, piled into the 2 back rooms like a litter of animals keeping warm. The oldest, Thomas, 16, on the floor nearest the door by habit. See, as if his body had already accepted that his father wasn't coming back to take that position. See, Martha stood in the kitchen and held the paper and looked at the cold stove and thought, "Silas, what did you do?" See, she didn't mean it as an accusation. She meant it as a genuine question, because she genuinely did not know. See, the debts listed on the paper were not debts she recognized. See, the figures were not figures she had ever seen in their household ledger. See, $312 to Vane Territorial Banking. See, signed apparently. See, by Silas Bellamy himself. See, 19 months ago. See, 19 months ago, Silas had been alive and healthy and talking about the spring planting. See, Martha put the paper face down on the table. She started the stove. See, she made the coffee. They were almost out, but she made it anyway, because some mornings you need to do one normal thing, or the whole structure of the day collapses before it begins. See, Thomas found her sitting at the table with both hands wrapped around the cup when he came out at 6. See, he was tall for his age, Thomas, dark-haired like Silas, with Silas's jaw and Silas's habit of pressing his lips together before he said something difficult. See, he looked at the paper on the table face down and looked at his mother, and he knew. See, just the shape of it. "How bad?" he said. See, Martha looked at her son, 16 years old. She had been 16 when she married Silas. See, she had been 17 when Thomas was born, terrified and certain she was dying, and the midwife had laughed at her, not unkindly, and said, "You're not dying, you're just meeting someone new." See, and now here he was, 6 feet tall, and pressing his lips together the same way his father used to, and she could not decide if that was a comfort or the most painful thing she had ever seen. See, "We'll talk about it after the little ones are up," she said. See, after Thomas. He sat down across from her and said nothing, which was also exactly what Silas would have done. See, that particular silence that wasn't agreement, just patience. See, it was the Bellamy way of waiting. The children surfaced over the next hour the way children always do in stages. By age, the youngest last. See, Clara, 14, slid into the kitchen first and immediately began helping without being asked, because Clara had always been that way. See, then the twins, Daniel and Joseph, 10 years old and already loud, arguing about something that had apparently started in a dream. See, Ruth, 8, solemn and sharp-eyed, who sat down and watched her mother's face with the focused attention of someone reading very small print. See, Ben, 6, who wanted to know if there were biscuits. See, and last, carried in by Clara, Little Nell, 2 years old, still mostly round, clutching a worn cloth rabbit that had lost one ear somewhere in the autumn. See, Martha fed them what she had. Cornmeal, the last of the salt pork. See, half a jar of preserved plum that she'd been rationing since November. See, she watched them eat, and she thought, 7 days. She thought, $312. See, she thought, Silas, I need to understand what you did. See, she went to see Orson Vane that same afternoon. See, this was not a decision she made lightly. See, Vane's offices were in the center of Ash Hollow, on the second floor above the Territorial Bank, a position he had clearly chosen deliberately, so that anyone who came to see him had to climb a staircase first. See, had to arrive slightly breathless, slightly diminished, at a door with his name painted in gold letters 3 inches high. See, Martha climbed the stairs without hurrying. The clerk inside, a young man with red hands and a collar too tight for his neck, see, looked up and took in Martha's size and her expression and made the instantaneous calculation that many people made when they first encountered Martha Bellamy. She was large, broad through the shoulders. See, not a woman, easily moved by furniture or weather or the disapproval of strangers, and something in the clerk's face decided very quickly that the polite fiction of Mr. Vane is unavailable might not serve him today. He knocked on the inner door and announced her. Vane was standing when she entered, which she had not expected. He was a lean man in his 50s, white at the temples, with the particular grooming of someone who spent money on looking like money. He had the kind of face that had probably been handsome 30 years ago and had since become merely precise sharp edges where softness used to be. Mrs. Bellamy, he said. Please sit, I'll stand, she said. I want to understand the debt. Vane sat down himself, which was a kind of answer. He opened a drawer, produced a folder, set it on the desk between them with the air of a man revealing something regrettable but inevitable. Martha looked at the papers. She could read. She'd always been a better reader than Silas, who had admitted this freely and without embarrassment, and she read what was in front of her carefully. Silas's signature was on every page. She recognized the handwriting. She had read his handwriting her entire adult life, on notes left on the kitchen table, on the backs of envelopes, on the margins of the almanac, where he tracked the weather and his own private observations. This was his hand. She was certain of it. She was also certain that these debts did not exist. When did my husband take this loan, she asked. April of '77, Vane said. Capital investment for the mine expansion. He never mentioned it. Many men prefer to manage financial matters independently, Mrs. Bellamy. It's not unusual. Silas and I talked about everything, Martha said. Not loudly, not emotionally, just as a statement of established fact, the way you'd say the stove is iron or the creek runs north. Vane's expression did not change. The records speak for themselves. She looked at him for a long moment. She was aware of her own size in that room, aware the way she was always aware of it in spaces that were built for other kinds of women, smaller women, women who took up less of a doorway. She had spent 33 years learning not to apologize for the space she occupied. But in Vane's office, with his gold-lettered door, and his precise face, and his folder full of papers with her dead husband's signature, she felt something she rarely felt. She felt the particular helplessness of a woman who knows she is being robbed and cannot prove it. 7 days, she said. 7 days, Vane confirmed, with a tone that almost suggested he was sorry about it. She left without thanking him. She went back down the stairs, out into the cold of Ash Hollow's Mason Street, and she stood on the planked sidewalk in the early afternoon light and made herself breathe. Around her the town moved in its ordinary patterns. Horses at the rail, smoke from the blacksmith. 2 women crossing the street who glanced at her and looked away with the slightly elevated chins of people who have already decided they are not responsible for someone else's difficulty. Ash Hollow was not a cruel town, exactly. It was a town that mistook its own discomfort for helplessness, which amounts to the same thing in practice. She needed money. She needed $312 in 7 days, and she had $9.40 in the household jar, and a list of neighbors she could approach that got shorter every time she thought about it honestly. She went to 4 houses that week. She was not too proud for it. See, pride is a luxury, and Martha Bellamy was not a woman who confused necessities with luxuries. See, Ezra Collins at the feed store. The Wharton family, whose eldest had courted Clara briefly the previous year. See, Pastor Hale's widow, who had always been kind, and Tom Garrett, who owned the sawmill and who had shaken Silas's hand at the funeral and said, "Anything you need, Martha, anything at all." See, Garrett gave her $12 and couldn't meet her eyes when she thanked him. See, Collins said he'd have to talk to his wife and never came to the door when she returned. See, the Wharton family was visiting relatives in Denver. She was told by a housekeeper who accepted the information with practiced neutrality. See, Pastor Hale's widow pressed Martha's hand and said she would pray, which was its own kind of answer. See, $89. In 7 days, she had assembled $89. See, 223 short. See, the morning of the 7th day came the way a sentence ends. See, Vane arrived with 4 deputies, and 2 men Martha didn't recognize, large men, hired men, the kind of men whose function in a scene like this is purely architectural. See, she had Thomas beside her, and Clara and the younger children behind them both. See, it was cold. The sky was white and flat the way a Colorado sky gets before serious snow, a sky that has made a decision. See, Vane stood in her yard and looked at her with something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite pity. See, somewhere between those two, in a territory that belongs specifically to people who are certain they will not be stopped. See, Mrs. Bellamy, he said, I have authorization from the town council, in consultation with County Judge Ferris, to, see, I know what you have, Martha said, to take possession of the property and to arrange for the placement of the children with appropriate. See, I said I know. Vane stopped. He looked at her with the faint surprise of a man unaccustomed to being interrupted. See, then he nodded once to the deputies, and one of them moved toward Thomas. See, Martha stepped in front of her son, not dramatically. See, not with a speech. She just moved 1 step sideways, putting her body between the deputy and her child, and she looked at the deputy and she said very quietly, "You touch my son, I will put you through that fence." See, the deputy stopped. He was younger than she'd expected, up close 25, maybe, with an uncertain quality that suggested this was not the job he'd imagined when he'd pinned the badge. See, he looked at Vane. Vane, Mrs. Bellamy, this behavior helps no one. See, the council has determined that you are not in a position to provide adequately for 7. See, the council determined. She said it the way you'd repeat a phrase in a foreign language you didn't fully trust your translation of. See, Orson Vane told the council what to determine, and the council determined it. See, that's what happened. I would strongly advise. See, I will fight every one of you, Martha said. I mean that plainly. See, I am not a woman who makes threats. I am telling you what will happen. See, you will have to physically remove me from in front of my children, and I promise you that is not a quick or easy thing to do, and every person in this town is watching right now from their windows, and they will see whatever you decide to do next. See, she was right about the windows. Half of Ash Hollow had found a reason to be near a window or a porch or a feed barrel that morning. See, the town was watching, not to intervene perhaps, but watching. See, Vane looked at her. He looked at the watching windows. See, his jaw moved slightly, a private adjustment. And then the hoofbeats came. See, they heard it before they saw him, a heavy, rhythmic sound from the direction of the North Road, a single horse moving with the unhurried certainty of something that doesn't consider the possibility of being stopped. See, the crowd in the square parted, not because it had to, but because something about the rider made people want to step aside before he arrived. See, Calder Rusk came out of the mountain fog on a gray horse that was too big to be beautiful and clearly didn't care. See, the man himself was enormous, not in the exaggerated way of a man who lifts heavy objects professionally, but in the unplanned way of someone built by decades of outdoor work and hard winters and solitude. See, a size that had accumulated rather than been cultivated. See, his face was heavily scarred on the left side, an old burn that had reshaped the landscape of his cheek and jaw, and his eyes above the scar were a pale, clear gray. See, half the children in the square had never seen Calder Rusk at close range. See, 2 of Martha's younger ones pressed backward into Clara. See, He pulled the horse up at the edge of the gathered crowd and sat there for a moment, looking at the scene at Vane, at the deputies, at Martha standing in front of her son. See, his expression was unreadable in the way that is completely different from blankness. See, it was the face of a man who had already calculated something and was now merely confirming the calculation. See, he swung down from the horse. He reached into his saddlebag. See, he pulled out a heavy pouch that landed on Vane's table, which had been set up in the yard with the officious permanence of authority that expected to be obeyed with a sound that nobody in the square had any difficulty identifying. See, gold is heavy. It has a specific sound when it hits a wood surface. See, everyone in Ash Hollow heard it. Vane looked at the pouch. See, he looked at Calder. Something moved behind his precise eyes, a brief recalculation, a flicker of a man who is used to controlling scenarios, suddenly finding that a variable has appeared that he hadn't built into his model. See, the debt, Calder said. His voice was lower than most men's voices and had the slightly roughened quality of someone who didn't use it often enough to keep it smooth. See, count it. Vane didn't move immediately. Count it, Calder said again. See, not louder, just more. Vane's clerk stepped forward and began counting. See, the square was very quiet. The flat white sky pressed down on all of them. See, Martha stood with her hand resting Johnson's arm and watched the mountain man, who had ridden out of the fog and dropped what she calculated was more money than she had ever held in her life onto a table in her yard. See, and she thought, who are you, and what do you want from us? See, $312. The clerk said it twice, once when he finished counting, and once when Vane asked him to repeat himself. See, Vane looked at Calder with the expression of a man who has just been moved off a square he thought he owned. See, the debt is paid, he said. The words came out with careful neutrality, the way a man says something he does not want to say. See, it is, Calder agreed. And then he said the thing that silenced the square. See, he said, I intend to marry Martha Bellamy, and I'm taking all 7 children with me. See, Martha turned and looked at him. He was looking directly at her, not at the crowd, not at Vane, not performing this declaration for anyone else's benefit. See, his pale gray eyes were steady and serious, and asking her something that a public square was entirely the wrong place to ask. But here they were. See, she thought about the $9.40 in the jar. See, she thought about Garrett's $12 and her 4 neighbors and the 223 she had not been able to find. See, she thought about Thomas and Clara and the twins and Ruth and Ben and Nell with her one-eared rabbit. See, she thought, I don't know you, she thought. But neither did Ash Hollow, and they just tried to sell my children. See, you take all 7, she said. That is the only condition. See, not 6, not 5, all of them, together, now and always. See, Calder looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read yet. She would spend the next several weeks learning to read it, and even then, it would take longer than she expected. See, but the core of it, even standing in the cold in her dead husband's coat, she understood he was not a man who made promises lightly, because he had lived long enough to know what a broken promise weighs. See, all 7, he said. Together, she held out her hand. See, he shook it not as a romantic gesture, nothing like that. Not yet, not for a long time, but as a man sealing an agreement he means to keep. See, behind her, Orson Vane watched the moment with his precise face very carefully controlled, and not a single person in Ash Hollow who saw his eyes in that moment would have called the expression inside them anything other than fury. See, he had built something, carefully, over months, the debts, the council, the timing of the deputies, and in the space of 3 minutes, a mountain man with a saddlebag full of gold had walked into the middle of it. See, he would not forget this. But that was tomorrow's problem. See, today, Martha Bellamy turned back to her children, to Thomas, who was watching Calder with the flat wariness of a boy who has recently learned that the world is willing to hurt his family, and to Nell, see, who had stopped crying and was looking at the big gray horse with the frank, undefended interest of a 2-year-old who has not yet learned to be afraid of large things. See, go inside, Martha told them. Pack what you can carry. See, we leave in an hour. Thomas looked at Calder again. See, Ma, he said quietly, we don't know him. No, Martha agreed. See, we don't. She looked at her son, at his pressed lips and his father's jaw, and his 16 years of steadiness. See, but we know what we're leaving, she said. And right now that's enough. See, they left Ash Hollow in the early afternoon, before the snow that the white sky had been promising finally made good on its threat. See, Calder had said 1 hour, and Martha had taken him at his word. See, she moved through the cabin with the focused efficiency of a woman who had learned, through years of managing 7 children in a space that was never quite large enough, to make decisions quickly and without second-guessing them. See, what they could carry, what they would leave. The household jar with the remaining $9. See, Silas's almanac, because she could not leave that. See, the children's winter clothes, sorted and bundled by Clara with a speed and competence that made Martha's chest ache, 14 years old, and already folding other people's futures with steady hands. See, Thomas carried the heaviest bundle without being asked. See, he had not said another word about Calder after their exchange in the yard, but Martha watched him, watched the mountain man through the window while he packed. See, the way a boy watches something he hasn't decided about yet, not hostile, not trusting, just gathering information. See, Calder waited outside. He did not come in. He checked the horse's rigging, tightened something on the saddlebag, stood with his back to the cabin in a way that could have been courtesy or could have been indifference. See, Martha noticed he had positioned himself so that he could see the road in both directions without appearing to watch it. See, that was not the posture of a man who was entirely relaxed. See, she filed that away. They came out in stages. The way they did everything, Clara first with Nell on her hip, then the twins barreling through the door in competition with each other over who could carry the larger bundle, then Ruth, see, then Ben dragging a sack that was mostly his collection of smooth rocks from the creek, which Martha had made a decision not to address right now. See, Thomas last with the door. Calder looked at the group assembled in the yard. See, he looked at Ben's rock-filled sack with an expression that was very carefully neutral. See, he looked at Nell, who stared back at him from Clara's hip with the absolute, unfiltered assessment of a 2-year-old. See, and then reached out one small hand toward the scar on his face, with the casual scientific curiosity of someone who has not yet learned that you don't do that. See, Clara pulled Nell's hand back. Sorry, she said quickly. See, she's fine, Calder said. He looked at the assembled group again. See, it's 2 days' ride to Blackthorn Ridge. We'll make camp tonight at the Cutler overhang it's sheltered. See, 1 horse can carry the youngest 2 and the heaviest supplies. See, the rest walk. Thomas looked at the single horse. See, that's a long walk for the twins. Yes, Calder said. See, Thomas waited for more. See, and when more didn't come, see, he pressed. See, what about their feet? See, it's freezing. See, Calder looked at the twins Daniel and Joseph, 10 years old, identically stubborn-faced, both already wearing their double layers. See, are your boots good? He asked them directly. Mine are, Daniel said. See, mine have a hole, Joseph admitted, which Daniel immediately turned to look at with fraternal disapproval, as if this was new information that reflected poorly on him. See, Calder went to his saddlebag without a word, produced a roll of oilcloth and a length of cord, and handed both to Joseph. See, wrap the outside of the boot before we go. Keep the cord tight around the ankle. See, it won't last forever, but it'll last 2 days. Joseph looked at the oilcloth. See, he looked at Calder. Thank you, he said, with the slightly formal dignity of a 10-year-old who has recently decided to start being serious about life. See, don't thank me, Calder said. Just keep up. Martha watched all of this and said nothing. See, she was building a picture. She was the kind of woman who built pictures slowly and thoroughly, who did not trust first impressions, but did not dismiss them either. See, what she saw in that exchange was a man who had not told Joseph his boot situation wasn't a problem, had not offered false reassurance, had just fixed it with what was available and moved on. See, Silas had been like that. Not in the same way Silas had been warm, where this man was contained, but that same orientation toward solve it rather than discuss it. See, she did not know yet whether that was a comfort or another thing to add to the pile of things she didn't know about Calder Rusk. See, they left. The town watched them go, some from windows, some openly from the street, the curious and the relieved, and the few who felt something that might have been shame if they'd been willing to examine it closely. See, Martha walked without looking back. She had made a decision, and she was not a woman who walked and looked backward at the same time. See, there was too much forward that required watching. See, the road north out of Ash Hollow climbed almost immediately, switchbacking up through stands of bare aspen and then into the denser dark of pine. See, the ground underfoot turning from packed dirt to frozen mud to the kind of rocky trail that required attention. See, the temperature dropped as they gained elevation. The sky held its snow in reserve, which was its own kind of tension. See, Calder walked the horse most of the time rather than riding it. See, Martha noticed this and could not entirely account for it. The horse could have carried a rider in addition to Nell and Ben, see, who were both settled in the saddle with a stability that suggested Calder had arranged them there with some knowledge of how to secure small children. See, he walked beside the animal instead, setting a pace that was not slow but was sustainable, and he moved in a way that took the ground seriously. See, watching the trail 2 steps ahead, the way a man does when he's made this particular journey enough times to know where it gets difficult before it gets difficult. See, the twins lasted 4 hours before Daniel's pride gave way to necessity, and he admitted his legs were hurting. See, Calder stopped, looked at him, and said nothing, just lifted the boy up and set him behind Ben in the saddle with an efficiency that suggested this was also something he'd calculated in advance. See, Daniel had the grace to look both grateful and embarrassed. See, Joseph, whose boot was holding up, said nothing, but Martha caught the small sideways glance he gave his brother, not mocking, just the private accounting of twins keeping track of who owed what. See, they made the Cutler overhang at dusk. It was exactly what Calder had said, a wide, low shelf of granite that extended far enough out from the cliff face to block the wind and most of the sky. See, dry inside, the ground covered in old pine needles. See, Calder had clearly been here before. There was a flat stone arrangement that had served as a fire ring at some point, and he rebuilt it from the existing materials without having to think about it. See, he built the fire before he did anything else. Martha noticed that too. See, she settled the children around it, while the light lasted Nell asleep almost immediately against Clara's side. Ben still clutching his rucksack with the territorial determination of someone waiting to be told he had to leave them behind. See, Ruth sitting with her knees up and her eyes moving between the fire and Calder with that focused, reading small print expression. See, Thomas sat slightly apart, close enough to be present, far enough to be watching. See, Calder cooked. He had food in the saddlebag, dried venison, hardtack, see, dried beans, that he soaked in a tin pot over the fire with a patience that suggested he had eaten trail food long enough to know that rushing it produces something nobody wants to put in their mouth. See, he passed portions without ceremony. He ate his own last, which Martha marked without comment. See, after the children were settled and the fire had settled with them, he moved to sit at the outer edge of the overhang, his back to the rock, looking out at the dark. See, Martha sat down 3 feet away from him. He looked at her sideways. See, I want to know who you are, she said, not aggressively. See, just as a statement of intent. What do you want to know? See, why, she said. Start with why. He was quiet for a moment. See, not a stalling quiet, a thinking quiet, the kind that comes from someone taking the question seriously. See, I knew your husband, he said. Not well, not friends. See, but I knew him. Martha was still. He came up to the ridge twice last spring, Calder said. See, looking for survey markers from the old territorial land records. See, he'd found something on your property or thought he had. See, he didn't tell me what. Men don't, usually when they think they might have something valuable. See, they get careful. He paused. 3rd time he was supposed to come up. He didn't. See, month later, I heard he'd died in the mine. The collapse, Martha said. See, there was no collapse, Calder said. The fire moved between them. See, outside the overhang, the wind had picked up in the trees, a sound like breathing. See, Martha kept her voice level with an effort she would not have admitted to. See, say that again. There was no collapse, he repeated. See, the east shaft where Silas was supposed to have died, I went up there after I heard. See, the timber work was intact. The supports hadn't failed. See, whatever happened to your husband in that shaft, it wasn't the mine coming down on him. See, Martha stared at the fire for a long time. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she usually wasn't aware of it as a physical fact. A piece of machinery operating inside her chest with or without her cooperation. See, continuing its work regardless of what she was thinking or feeling or holding together. See, and Vane, she said. Vane knew about the silver, Calder said. He had to. The timing is too clean. See, Silas. See, debts appear. See, the family loses the property. See, Vane acquires it. See, that's not coincidence. That's a plan. You have evidence of this. See, I have Silas's survey map. He left it with me not intentionally, I think. See, he forgot it the second time he came to the ridge. See, I kept it because I thought he'd come back for it. See, then he didn't. Calder looked at his hands, which were resting on his knees, large and scarred and entirely still. See, that map shows a silver vein under the Bellamy property that would make Orson Vane one of the wealthiest men in the territory. See, the sound of the twins breathing, slow and unconscious with sleep, came from behind them. See, Ruth had finally closed her eyes. Thomas was still awake. Martha knew she could tell by the quality of his stillness, but he was pretending not to be, which was its own kind of trust. See, why didn't you go to the authorities? Martha asked. See, with what? Calder said, not bitterly, just practically. See, a map I found on a dead man's behalf and a theory about a mine shaft. Vane has Judge Ferris. See, he has 2 members of the county council. He has enough money to make a story disappear before it becomes a story. He paused. See, but if the Bellamy family is still alive, still together, with a legal claim to that property, and if that map reaches the territorial office in Denver, that's different. See, that's a story he can't make disappear. Martha looked at him. See, at the scar on his face, which was easier to see now in the firelight than it had been in the square old, fully healed, the kind of scar that had been lived with so long it had become part of the geography of a face rather than an event on it. See, at the gray eyes that were watching the darkness beyond the overhang with steady vigilance. See, you put yourself in the middle of this, she said. See, you paid the debt. You made yourself visible. Vane knows your name now. See, Vane already knew my name, Calder said. He's been trying to acquire Blackthorn Ridge for 4 years. See, the ridge sits above the same geological formation as your property. He glanced at her. See, I wasn't interested in selling, and now you've married his target and her 7 children, Martha said. See, I've proposed to marry them, he said. We shook hands. See, that's not the same as married. It will be, Martha said. See, when we get where we're going, it will be. Because I'm not bringing 7 children into a man's house and calling it something temporary. See, Calder looked at her for the first time fully, not sideways, not glancing, but directly, with the kind of attention that is slightly uncomfortable to receive. See, all right, he said, I'm not a soft woman, Martha said. See, not as a warning, just as information she thought he should have. See, I'm not I know what I look like to people. I know what this town thinks of me. See, too big, too loud, too much trouble for too little reward. See, I didn't hear you mention anything soft or loud, Calder said. See, I heard you tell a deputy you'd put him through a fence, and then stand your ground in front of your son while Orson Vane and 4 armed men watched. See, Martha said nothing. That's not loud, Calder said. See, that's just someone with a very clear idea of what matters. See, she looked at the fire. She thought about Silas, who had also been like that, who had seen her not as an exception to something, not as a large woman who was impressive for a large woman, but just as Martha, see, whose size was part of her the way her eyes were part of her, and her stubbornness was part of her, and all of it together made a person who was worth talking to, worth marrying, worth coming home to. See, she missed him so sharply in that moment that it was almost physical, a weight behind the sternum, a hand closing around something internal. See, she did not cry. She hadn't cried since the funeral, and she wasn't going to start now at an overhang in the dark 2 days from anywhere. See, with her children sleeping behind her and a scarred stranger 3 feet away who apparently knew things about her husband's death that no one had bothered to tell her. See, you should have come sooner, she said, not angry. See, just honest. Calder was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. See, I should have. That was all. No explanation, no defense. See, just an acknowledgement, direct and without decoration. See, Martha put that in the picture she was building, in a section she hadn't labeled yet. See, she went to sleep on her side nearest Nell. Calder did not sleep. See, She heard him moving once during the night, the soft, careful sounds of a large man, trying not to wake anyone, and then silence, and then the distant sound of something in the trees that she could not identify, and then silence again. See. When she woke before dawn, he was back at his position at the edge of the overhang, with a rifle across his knees that she hadn't noticed him carrying before. See, she did not ask about it. Yet the second day was harder. See, the trail climbed more seriously, and the wind had made a decision overnight about the temperature, dropping it to the kind of cold that gets inside wool and stays there. See, little Nell refused to stay in the saddle she had slept through most of the previous day's riding, and now wanted to walk with a toddler's absolute conviction about her own capabilities. See, which lasted approximately 11 minutes before her legs gave out, and she sat down in the middle of the trail and announced this through crying. See, Martha started toward her and stopped. Calder had already crouched down in front of Nell. See, he was at her eye level, which, for a man his size, required a significant fold of his enormous body, and he said something to her quietly, too low for Martha to hear. See, Nell looked at him. The crying tapered into the hitching, breath-catching aftermath of 2-year-old crying, which is a specific sound that communicates, "I'm willing to be persuaded." See, Calder stood up, settled Nell against his chest with one arm, and kept walking. See, he carried her for 3 hours. Martha watched this and worked to keep her face neutral, because the picture she was building was becoming complicated in ways she hadn't anticipated. See, a man who was dangerous, and she believed he was dangerous. There was no question of that. See, she could feel it in the way a room feels different when something large and unpredictable enters. It was also a man who had picked up her crying 2-year-old and carried her through mountain cold for 3 hours without comment or, see, complaint, or any apparent expectation of acknowledgement. See, these things could both be true. She knew that. She'd been alive long enough to know that people are rarely one thing. See, but knowing it and managing it were different problems. See, Ruth appeared at Martha's side around midday. Ruth, 8 years old, solemn as a judge, who had been watching everything with her reading small print attention since the square in Ash Hollow. "See, Mama," she said. Is he good or bad?" Martha looked at the back of Calder's head, at Nell's small dark one resting against his shoulder. "See, I don't know yet," she said honestly. Ruth considered this. "See, he carries things without complaining," she said. "See, Papa did that." "Papa did," Martha agreed. "Ben still has his rocks," Ralph said, shifting topics with the efficiency of someone whose mind works faster than the conversation can keep up. "See, he's going to have to leave them eventually." "Let him keep them another day," Martha said. "See, Ruth looked at her sideways. "You said that yesterday." "See, I know." Ruth walked on, apparently satisfied with this non-answer, which was one of the things Martha loved most about her daughter. She was perceptive enough to notice when someone was giving her something less than a full truth, see, and secure enough not to require the full truth every time. See, they saw Blackthorn Ridge from a distance in the mid-afternoon, which was not when they arrived. See, from a distance it was simply a dark mass of granite rising from the mountain's shoulder, a shape that was more deliberate seeming than the landscape around it, too angular, too purposeful. See, it took another 2 hours to reach it. The cabin was built against the cliff face the way a barnacle builds against a hull fitted into it, using the rock as its back wall. See, extending forward from that foundation with heavy timber work that had the quality of permanence rather than construction. See, it was larger than Martha had expected, substantially larger. See, the yard before it was enclosed on 3 sides, the fourth being the cliff itself. See, there was a barn, low, solid, and what appeared to be a root cellar, and a structure she couldn't identify yet. See, she would identify it later as a smokehouse, fully stocked. See, Thomas walked the perimeter of the yard in about 45 seconds, looking at things with the assessing practicality of a boy who had been the man of the house for weeks and was trying to determine what kind of place he'd walked his family into. See, he didn't say anything to Calder, but Martha watched him revise something behind his eyes. See, the cabin inside it was not warm yet. The fire hadn't been lit, but it was shelter in the specific way that a well-built structure is shelter before it's heated a solidity of walls that meant the wind outside stayed outside. See, that the cold was manageable rather than absolute. See, there were bunks in the back room, 4 of them stacked, which the younger children immediately inspected with the instinctive assessment of siblings establishing territory. See, there was a main room with a stone hearth large enough to heat the space efficiently, a kitchen area, a table with benches long enough to seat considerably more than 8 people. See, it smelled like pine resin and wood smoke and the particular dusty, closed-up smell of a space that had been empty for some weeks. See, Calder built the fire. By the time the cabin had warmed enough for the children to stop wearing their coats inside, the food situation had resolved itself. Calder had opened the root cellar and walked Martha through it, with the focused practicality of a man walking someone through inventory, preserved meats, dried vegetables, root vegetables, grain salt, lard, dried fruit. Enough, he said, for 4 months if managed correctly. You expected company, Martha said. I expected winter, he said. Winter in these mountains doesn't ask whether you're ready. She looked at the shelves. She looked at the man who had stocked them. You've been alone up here a long time, she said. Long enough. She did not push further on that, not then. There were children to settle and a fire to manage, and the specific logistical work of 8 people attempting to occupy a space that had housed one for the last several years, and all of that took the remainder of the evening. It was only after the children were in the bunks and the twins had finally stopped talking, a process that had taken longer than either of them had admitted to being capable of, and the fire had settled into its slower, nighttime mode, that Martha found herself alone in the main room with the day's accumulated weight and the specific silence of a mountain night, which is different from a town night, thicker somehow, more deliberate. She heard the exterior bolt slide. The sound was unmistakable. Heavy. Final, a bolt being thrown from outside. Martha stood up from the bench. She stood very still for one moment, listening to the sound fade, and then she crossed the room to the iron poker hanging beside the hearth, and she took it down and she sat back down on the bench and waited. She did not panic. She was not a woman who panicked. But she was also not a woman who let herself be locked inside a room without understanding why. And she sat with the poker across her knees and the fire at her back and thought about everything she knew about Calder Rusk, which was not enough, and everything she'd staked on the picture she was building, and whether the picture was a lie. She waited an hour, maybe more. The fire burned lower. The cabin was fully warm now, the kind of warm that gets into the walls and holds, and she might have considered sleep if she hadn't been holding a poker and cataloging exit points and listening for sounds outside. The bolt slid back just before sunrise. The door opened, and Calder came in, and he was cold. She could feel the cold that came with him before she could see his face fully, and he stopped when he saw her sitting there with the poker, and his face did something complicated. The door, Martha said. Grizzlies, he said. There are 2 on the ridge that woke early unusual, but the winter's been irregular. The exterior bolt keeps the door from being forced open while I'm out. I patrol the perimeter at night during the early season. She looked at him. She looked at the rifle in his hand and the frost on his collar, and the dark circles that suggested he had been awake significantly longer than she had. You could have told me that before you left, she said. I should have, he said, which was apparently the only apology he was capable of generating. But he said it with a directness that made it feel less like deflection than like a genuine admission from a man who didn't have much practice at explaining himself to other people. Martha set the poker on the table, not back on the hook. Just on the table where they could both see it. Next time, she said, you tell me before you leave. Next time, he agreed. He sat down on the opposite bench, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and the fire between them was low but present. And outside the ridge was beginning to lighten from black to the particular dark blue that comes just before a winter dawn in high country. The map, Martha said. Silas's survey. Where is it? Calder reached inside his coat and produced a rolled document, oilcloth wrapped, tied with cord. He set it on the table between them. She untied it and opened it, flattening it with both hands, and looked at her dead husband's handwriting, marking the land she had lived on and cooked on and born children in. Marking the underground thing beneath it that had apparently been worth killing for. See, the silver vein ran northeast to southwest under the full length of the Bellamy property. See, Silas had marked it in the careful, slightly self-conscious hand of a man who knew he was recording something important and wanted to get the recording right. See, at the bottom of the map in the same hand was a note she hadn't expected. See, if I don't come back from the next survey and something tells me I might not take this to Denver. See, don't let Vane touch the land. Martha will know what to do with what's hers. See, Martha read it 3 times. Then she rolled the map back up and tied the cord around it and held it in both hands and looked at the fire. See, Martha will know what to do. Silas had known. See, he had known something was wrong. And he had left this with a man he'd met twice on a mountain ridge, because there was nowhere in Ash Hollow he could trust it to stay safe, and he had still believed, in writing, see, in the past tense that is also always present, that his wife would know what to do. See, she pressed the rolled map against her chest for a moment. See, just a moment. He trusted you, she said. He barely knew me, Calder said. See, he trusted your instincts, she said, or your solitude. See, sometimes men trust a person with something because they've run out of people and they need somewhere safe to put it. She looked across at him. See, why did you keep it? Honestly, Calder was quiet. See, outside the dark blue was beginning to gray. Because he asked me to, he said finally. See, in a note he put inside the oilcloth, short version. See, and because I recognize the situation. A man who has found something valuable and is trying to figure out how to protect it without drawing attention to the fact that it exists. A pause. See, I was in a similar position once. Nobody came to help me. See, Martha heard what was underneath that sentence and did not ask about it yet, because some information has to be offered rather than extracted, and she was beginning to understand the particular patience required to know Calder Rusk. See, we need to get copies of this to Denver, she said. See, already arranged, he said. I sent a rider 3 days ago. See, before Vane made his move in the square, she stared at him. See, 3 days ago. I knew he was going to move. The timing of the notice, the composition of the debt, it was designed to be too fast to fight legally. See, so I sent a rider and I came down from the ridge. He looked at her steadily. See, I wasn't certain you'd accept my proposal. What would you have done if I hadn't? See, paid the debt and testified to what I know, he said. See, from less useful position. Martha looked at the man across the fire from her scarred, contained, sleep-deprived, in possession of her dead husband's last message, and copies of documents already traveling toward Denver. See, having planned 3 moves ahead of a situation most people in Ash Hollow hadn't seen coming until it was standing in their yard, and she thought, who are you? See, not the version she'd asked the night before, which had been a question about identity. See, this version was different. See, this was a question about the kind of person who plans carefully and acts without announcement and carries a 2-year-old for 3 hours and bolts doors to protect people and sits up all night in the cold and says, I should have, instead of I had to. See, she didn't have the answer yet. The picture wasn't finished. See, but she thought it might be worth finishing. She looked at the map in her hands. See, she thought about what Vane had done to Silas, to her children, to the entire structure of a family's life, and she thought about what was already moving toward Denver on a fast horse. See, and she thought about 7 children asleep in bunks that were solid and warm, in a cabin built into a cliff face on a mountain that nobody could reach without effort. And she thought, not yet, but maybe. See, get some sleep, she said. Calder looked mildly surprised, as if the instruction was directed at someone he hadn't expected to be included. See, I'm fine. You've been awake all night and you'll be useless tomorrow, Martha said. See, I've managed 7 children and a homestead alone for 6 weeks. See, I can watch a fire for a few hours. He looked at her. See, something moved in his face, not quite an expression, more the shadow of one, like a word thought but not said. See, he lay down on the bench on his side of the fire, coat and boots still on, and he was asleep in the particular way of people who know how to sleep under difficult conditions completely, immediately, see, without the long negotiation that most people require. See, Martha put another log on the fire. See, she sat with the map in her lap, and Silas's handwriting in her memory, and the sleeping sounds of 8 people around her, and she watched the light outside the window change from gray-blue to the pale, cold yellow of a high country morning. See, Outside, the ridge was still. The grizzlies, wherever they were, had found somewhere else to be. See. And Orson Vane, in Ash Hollow, was waking up to a world in which he did not yet know that the game he thought he'd lost in the square was already, quietly, being decided somewhere above the snowline. See. In a cabin built into rock, around a fire that had been burning all night. See. The first week on Blackthorn Ridge had the quality of a held breath. See. Not peaceful, exactly. 8 people in a space designed for one do not produce peace, they produce negotiation. Constant and layered. See. Over territory and noise, and the specific friction of people who do not yet know each other's rhythms, trying to occupy the same hours of the same days. See. The twins established within 48 hours that the left bunk was Daniel's and the right was Joseph's. A determination reached through a conflict Martha chose not to examine too closely. See, Ben found a corner near the hearth that he designated as the territory of his rock collection, which had survived the journey intact and now occupied a shelf Calder had said nothing about, which Martha took as a form of permission. See, Ruth appointed herself the keeper of the food inventory, appearing at Martha's elbow on the second morning with a precisely organized list of what was in the root cellar, written in her careful 8-year-old hand on the back of a flour sack. See, Clara managed Nell with the practiced competence of a girl who had been second mother since Nell was born. But Martha watched her eldest daughter and saw something underneath the competence, a tiredness that was not physical. See, a quality of someone who had been holding a weight so long they'd forgotten it was there to put down. See, she didn't say anything yet. There was too much else. See, Calder moved through all of it with the particular quality of a man who had been alone for a long time and was now attempting to recalibrate without making the recalibration visible. See, he woke before anyone else. He was outside before the children stirred, doing work that revealed itself only in its results. Wood already split and stacked by the door. The horse tended, the perimeter walked. See, he ate at the table with the family, but said little, answering questions when they were directed at him, and not generating conversation independently, which Martha understood was not coldness, but something closer to unfamiliarity. See, the conversational equivalent of a muscle not used in years. See, Thomas watched him. See, that was Thomas's primary occupation in those first days, watching Calder with the relentless, calibrated attention of a 16-year-old who had decided that the man who had married his mother required assessment before anything else. See, he was not hostile. He was not warm. He was present, attentive, and thoroughly withholding judgment, which was both more mature than most adults managed and slightly exhausting to be around. See, Calder appeared to understand this without being told. See, he did not push Thomas. He did not perform warmth in Thomas's direction or attempt to establish authority over him. See, he simply did things in Thomas's presence and let Thomas watch, which Martha thought was either genuinely wise or accidentally so. See, on the 4th morning, the thing that broke the held breath was not dramatic. See, Calder was repairing a broken axle on the woodcart in the yard, working with focused, unhurried attention, and the twins had drifted out to watch him in the way children drift toward any activity that involves tools and noise. See, Daniel eventually moved close enough to look at what Calder's hands were doing, and Calder said, without looking up, "Hold that end steady." And Daniel held it, and they worked together in silence for 20 minutes until the axle was done. See, when they came inside for the midday meal, Daniel's face had a look Martha recognized, the specific expression of a child who has been given a task and completed it correctly and is carrying the fact of that like something good to eat later. See, Joseph looked at his brother with the acute sensitivity of a twin, reading an emotion he hasn't personally experienced yet, and his jaw moved slightly. See, Calder appeared not to notice any of this, which was its own kind of attention. See, that same afternoon, he produced from the barn a toy that had clearly been in a state of disrepair for some time, a carved wooden horse on a wheeled base, the paint worn, one wheel split and jammed. See, he set it on the table in the main room and worked on it through the late afternoon with a small knife and a patience that suggested he was not in a hurry. See, Ben appeared at his elbow within 10 minutes. Ruth appeared at his other elbow 5 minutes after that. See, whose was it? Ruth asked in her direct, reading small print way. See, Calder kept working. A long pause, not avoidance, Martha thought. Just the rhythm of a man deciding how much of an answer to give. See, my daughters, he said. The room was quiet in a particular way. See, Martha was at the stove and kept her back turned and her hands moving and said nothing. See, where is she? Ruth asked. She died, Calder said. See, 7 years ago, her mother too. Ruth was quiet for a moment. See, how fever, he said. Another silence. See, Ben reached out and touched the carved horse's head with one cautious finger. See, it's good, he said, which was his version of condolence and also his honest assessment, delivered simultaneously without apparent awareness of the difference. See, it will be when the wheel's fixed, Calder said. He gave the toy to Nell the following morning. See, Nell received it with the solemnity of a child, accepting something important, examined it from every angle, and then carried it with her for the rest of the day, including to the table and to bed. See, which Clara reported with an expression that was trying to be neutral and not entirely managing it. See, Martha saw Calder watching Nell carry the toy across the yard that afternoon, just for a moment, just the briefest pause in whatever he was doing, and the expression on his face was the kind a person isn't usually aware they're making. See, open in a way his face wasn't normally open. Old pain and something that wasn't quite its opposite but was in that direction. See, she turned away before he caught her looking. She filed it carefully in the picture she was building, in the section that was filling up faster than she'd expected. See, Thomas came to her that evening, when the younger children were in the back room, and Calder was outside making his night patrol. See, Ma, he said. He sat down at the table and looked at the grain of the wood. See, he told Daniel his daughter died. I know. He's been up here alone for 7 years. See, near enough, Martha said. Thomas was quiet for a moment. See, he pressed his lips together, that Silas gesture, that internal adjustment, and then he said, It doesn't mean he's trustworthy. See, no, Martha agreed. It doesn't. But it means he's not. It means there's a reason for how he is. He said it with the slightly effortful tone of someone working out a position in real time, not yet certain of the conclusion. See, there's usually a reason for how people are, Martha said. See, doesn't always make how they are easy to live with. See, but yes. Thomas looked at her. Do you trust him? See, Martha considered the question with the honesty it deserved. See, the map in the oilcloth, now stored inside her dress during the day. See, the rider sent to Denver before Vane made his move. See, the exterior bolt and the explanation that followed, and the poker she'd left on the table as a statement he'd received without offense. See, the carved horse, the oilcloth boot wrap for Joseph's foot. See, the way he'd carried Nell for 3 hours without once suggesting it was a sacrifice. See, I trust his intentions, she said finally. I'm still working on the rest. See, Thomas seemed to find this acceptable. He was, fundamentally, his father's son. He could sit with an incomplete answer if the answer was honest. See, he went to bed. Martha sat by the fire and listened to the ridge settle around her. See, she was tired in a way she hadn't fully let herself feel yet, the bone-level exhaustion of 6 weeks of sole responsibility. See, of debt notices and neighbor visits and sleepless nights and the specific grinding effort of keeping terror from reaching her children's faces. See, she had been running on the fuel of necessity, and now that the immediate emergency had shifted into something more complex and less immediate, the exhaustion was beginning to collect interest. See, she allowed herself, in the privacy of the banked fire and the quiet cabin, to be tired. See, just for a few minutes. Then she heard something outside. See, not the sounds of Calder's patrol. She was learning those. The particular rhythm of his footsteps on the frozen ground. The pauses where he stopped to look or listen. See, this was something else. Farther away. Faint enough that she might have dismissed it as wind, except that it came in a pattern that wind doesn't produce. See, she went to the window. The yard was empty under a hard, clear sky, no moon, but enough stars to see shapes and distance. See, she looked for Calder and found him at the far edge of the yard, very still, facing north. See, his rifle was up. She watched for 3 minutes. Nothing moved in the darkness beyond the fence. See, whatever Calder had heard or seen or hadn't heard, and was simply being cautious about it, produced nothing visible. See, he lowered the rifle eventually, stood a moment longer, then began his return circuit. See, she went back to bed. In the morning, she asked him. See, riders, he said. 2, maybe 3. They weren't coming up the ridge, they were below, on the main trail. See, checking the approach. Martha set down the tin cup she was holding. See, Vane. Or Vane's men. He'd want to know where we went. See, know what he's working with. How long do you think we have? See, Calder looked at the window. Before he decides the situation requires action? I don't know. See, depends on what comes back from Denver and how fast. See, depends on whether he hears about the rider I sent. He looked back at her. See, the map is the problem. While he believes he can still recover the map, he has a reason to come up here. See, once Denver has what they need, coming up here gets him nothing. See, so the question is whether Denver moves faster than Vane does. See, yes, he said. Martha thought about this. She thought about the rider, a man she hadn't seen, whose name she didn't know, on a horse she hadn't chosen, carrying a package she hadn't prepared, riding to a city she'd never been to. See, through winter mountain roads, to offices where no one was expecting him. See, she thought about all the points in that chain where something could go wrong. See, she thought about her 7 children in the back room. See, what do we do in the meantime? She said. We make the ridge as difficult to approach as possible, he said. See, and we stay ready. He was looking at her with the steady, direct quality she'd learned in the last several days. Was his version of asking a question. He didn't usually form it as a question. See, just presented the information and looked at her and waited to see what she did with it. See, show me what you have, she said. He showed her. See, the defensive preparations Calder had made over his years on Blackthorn Ridge were the work of a man who had thought seriously about the particular vulnerability of living in a place that was hard to reach, which meant it, see, was also hard to be reached from if help was needed. See, there were positions at the yard fence that provided cover. See, there was a secondary supply of water inside the cabin in case the exterior well became unusable. See, there was ammunition stored in a way that protected it from damp, in quantities that Martha had not initially registered as unusual, but now understood differently. See, he had been thinking about this longer than she had. See, you planned for this, she said, not accusatory, just recognizing it. See, I planned for the possibility, he said. Vane's been circling the ridge for 4 years. See, I assumed eventually the circling would become something else. See, you didn't send for anyone, she said. You've been here alone, planning for a siege, and you didn't. She stopped. See, she looked at him. You weren't going to ask for help, were you? See, even when it came. He didn't answer right away. He was checking the loading on a rifle, running his thumb along the stock. See, I didn't expect anyone to come, he said. Then, with the careful precision of someone being more accurate than comfortable, I didn't think I'd have a reason to ask. See, she heard the dimension of that sentence. 7 years. See, a wife and a daughter, and a fever that came fast. See, a man who had calculated, somewhere in those 7 years, that the appropriate response to the world's capacity for loss was to reduce the number of things that could be lost. See, she did not say any of this out loud. She just looked at him and thought, well, now you have 8 reasons, and then went back to learning where he kept the ammunition. See, the days that followed had a different quality than the first week, less held breath, more active. See, Calder began teaching Thomas in the mornings, starting with the rifle because Thomas had asked, and Calder had looked at the 16-year-old for a moment and apparently decided that this was a reasonable request. See, Martha watched the first lesson from the cabin window, watched Calder position Thomas's hands and say something she couldn't hear and step back. See, and watched Thomas's face go through the concentration she recognized from when Silas had taught him things that closed down, fully present look of a boy learning something that matters. See, Thomas's first shot went wide by a significant margin. See, Calder said something. Thomas reloaded. His second shot was better. See, not good, but better. Martha turned away from the window and went back to the flowers she was working with. See, the afternoons became a different kind of school. See, Calder showed the older boys how to read the mountain, the particular quality of cold air coming off certain rock faces that predicted weather, the animal tracks that indicated whether the grizzlies were near or far. See, the way ice formed on the north side of trees differently than on the south. See, he taught them without sentimentality about it. He said the mountain will kill you if you treat it like scenery, which was both blunt and accurate, And Daniel immediately asked how many people the mountain had actually killed, which produced a lengthy and highly specific answer that kept both twins engaged for the better part of an afternoon. Ruth attached herself to Calder's inventory work. This was not something Calder had invited, but it was also not something he prevented. He arrived at the root cellar one morning to find Ruth already there with her flower sack list and her pencil, and he looked at her and she looked at him. And some negotiation occurred that Martha was not present for, and thereafter Ruth accompanied him during the morning inventory check as a matter of established routine. Annotating her list with the focused satisfaction of someone doing exactly the work their mind is built for. She's going to be an accountant, Clara said one evening, with the affectionate exasperation of a sister who has accepted her sibling's nature. She's going to be whatever she decides, Martha said. Clara was quiet for a moment. She was hemming something by firelight, her hands moving with the automatic competence of long practice. She was 14, and she had her father's dark hair and her mother's breadth of shoulder. And in the firelight, she looked older than 14 in a way that was not about sophistication, but about load-bearing the face of someone who had been carrying more than her share and had adjusted to it. Mama, Clara said. Am I going to have to be? She stopped. She started again. There's enough space here. For all of us. Actually enough space. Not just almost enough. She looked up from the hemming. I haven't had my own. I've been sharing with Nell since she was born. And it's fine. I don't mind Nell, but there's a room off the back that Calder uses for storage, Martha said. I've already been thinking about it. Clara looked at her with an expression that was trying to stay neutral and not managing it. Really? Nothing's decided, Martha said. But I've been thinking about it. Clara went back to the hemming. A minute later, very quietly, she said, "Thank you, Mama." Martha said nothing. She watched her daughter's hands move over the cloth and thought about all the things Clara had managed without complaint, and thought about 14 years old, and thought about how the capacity for quiet endurance in a child can be both a gift and a damage, depending on what uses it. She went to find Calder the next morning. He was in the barn. She told him about the storage room, plainly, without asking, framing it as a statement of what was going to happen, rather than a request for permission, because she had decided, sometime in the last several days, that this was how things needed to work between them. He was not by nature a man who volunteered space. He needed to be shown that space had been allocated, and then he would accommodate it, and that was how this particular partnership was going to function. He looked at her for a moment. "It's mostly equipment," he said. Takes a while to move. "Thomas and Daniel can help," she said. This afternoon. He nodded once. "All right." She was turning to leave when he said her name. She turned back. "The water barrel in the east corner," he said. "Leave that where it is. The floor has a low point there. The barrel needs to be against the east wall or it settles wrong." She looked at him. He was looking at her with the expression that was his version of saying something more than the words. And she was learning to read that expression the way she'd learned to read Silas's pressed lip silence, not identical, but the same category of communication. He was telling her she could reorganize his space. He was just also telling her the one thing he needed her to keep. "The east wall," she said, "understood." She did not see him smile. But something shifted in the set of his jaw that was in the same neighborhood. It was on the 9th day that things changed. The morning had been ordinary in the specific way that Blackthorn Ridge had begun to define ordinary, which was not the same ordinary as Ash Hollow, but was becoming its own version of the word. Breakfast. Inventory check with Ruth. Thomas at practice with the rifle. The twins learning to split wood with the smaller axe under Calder's supervision, which was producing more noise than results, but genuine effort. Clara with Nell. Ben reorganizing his rocks according to a classification system he had developed and explained to no one. Martha was at the table working through the household accounts, a habit she had maintained through everything. Silas's death and the debt notice and the journey and all of it. Because numbers were reliable in a way that almost nothing else was when she heard Thomas's specific shout from outside. Not pain, not accident, Something else, the sharp, carrying shout of someone who has seen something and needs it heard immediately. See, she was at the door before the sound fully finished. See, Thomas was at the fence, pointing north toward the trail below the ridge. See, Calder was already there, already looking, rifle in hand. See, 12 riders. They were below, not on the ridge yet, still on the lower approach, but they were coming, and they were not traveling in the casual way of men passing through. See, they were spread in a formation that had purpose in it. See, deliberate. Spread wide enough that trying to run from the cabin in any direction would intersect with at least 2 of them. See, Martha counted them again. 12. Get inside, Calder said. See, he was not loud. He said it the way he said most things, direct, without extra. See, Thomas. Martha started. Thomas with me, Calder said. See, he looked at the boy, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement, one to the other, that this was the moment the rifle practice had been for. See, Thomas's face went through several expressions in quick succession and landed on the same one Martha recognized from that first morning in the kitchen. Silas's jaw, pressed lips, the Bellamy decision-making face. See, yes, Thomas said. Go inside, Calder told Martha. See, tell me who they are first. Luther Crow, he said. See, not looking at her, watching the riders below, hired gun. See, Vane uses him for situations that need to be resolved off the record. See, how many men has Crow killed? Calder was quiet for one beat. See, enough that the number doesn't make people feel better when I tell it. See, Martha looked at the 12 riders spreading below the ridge. See, she looked at her cabin, her children inside it, and she looked at the man beside her and at her son, and she said, then we don't run. See, we make this hard. She went inside, but not the way Calder had meant it. See, she organized the children with the specific efficiency of crisis into the back room, the solid-walled back room with no windows facing the approach. See, the twins assigned to stay with Ruth and Ben and Nell with a weight in her voice that did not allow negotiation. See, Clara she stationed at the interior doorway with the specific instruction of what to do and what not to do. And when Clara started to say something, Martha held up one hand and Clara, who understood her mother, stopped. See, the first shot came 20 minutes later. It hit the cabin wall high, above the window line, the kind of shot that is a statement rather than an attempt. See, we're here, we can reach you. Open the door. Calder didn't open the door. See, he answered with a single shot from the window aimed at the ground in front of the lead rider's horse, 12 inches forward of the hooves. See, another statement. I know exactly where you are, and this is what I'm choosing not to do yet. See, the riders stopped. A voice came up from below. Carrying practiced a man accustomed to projecting authority across distance. See, Rusk. Send out the woman and the Bellamy papers, and we walk away. See, nobody needs to be damaged here. Calder looked at Martha across the room. See, she looked back at him. The Bellamy papers, she said quietly. See, that's what this is. He doesn't know about Denver yet, Calder said, equally quiet. See, he still thinks recovery is possible. Then we tell him, Martha said. See, if we tell him, he might decide to burn the problem rather than recover it. See, if we don't tell him, he keeps coming. She held his gaze. See, tell him. Calder turned to the window. Crow, he called. See, his voice was the carrying, unhurried voice of a man who has lived in open spaces long enough that projection is simply how he speaks. See, the documents you're looking for left for Denver 10 days ago. See, you're not recovering them. Whatever Vane told you the job was worth, that's not the job anymore. See, silence from below. Then, Crow's voice, that's a convenient thing to say through a window. See, it's also true, Calder said. Man I sent was Harlan Spade, rides a roan mare, knows the South Pass well. See, if you have contacts in Glenwood, they can confirm he came through. A pause. See, Vane sent you up here to solve a problem that's already past solving. See, think about what that means for the 12 of you. See, another silence, this one longer. The particular quality of a silence in which a calculation is being revised. See, then a shot came through the window. It was not a warning shot. See, the rifle ball passed through the upper portion of the window frame and caught Calder in the right shoulder with a sound that Martha felt in her chest before she fully processed what had happened, a heavy, wet impact. See, and then Calder hit the cabin wall and went down on one knee, with his left hand gripping the windowsill and his face doing something complicated and controlled. See, Calder. She was across the room without deciding to be. See, I'm standing, he said. His voice was strained, but not panicked, a man reporting status the way you report weather. See, he was already pulling himself back up with his left arm. See, his right was not working properly. She could see it, the way it moved wrong, the way the shoulder sat differently than it should. See, Thomas appeared from the back of the cabin. He had heard the shot and come through the interior door, and he took in the scene in 1 second and moved to Calder's other side before Martha could tell him to do anything. See, take the window, Calder said to Thomas. Don't fire unless they're coming through the yard. See, just let them see the rifle. Thomas looked at the rifle in Calder's left hand, took it, went to the window. See, his face was white under his color, but his hands were steady, not because he wasn't afraid, Martha knew, but because he was afraid and doing it anyway, which is the only kind of courage that counts. See, below she heard shouting, not the organized shouting of men coordinating an assault, something more fractured. See, an argument, Crow's voice, harder than before, and other voices underneath it. See, she packed Calder's shoulder with what she had strips torn from the cleanest fabric in the cabin, pressed hard and held. See, he submitted to this without argument, which told her more about the pain than anything his face was doing. See, the argument below, she said, working. They're not all committed. See, hired men, Calder said through his teeth. Some of them are just here for the money. See, the situation has changed since they left Ash Hollow. See, how many do you think would walk if given the right reason? See, he looked at her sideways. What are you thinking? See, she pressed the packing harder and felt him absorb it without making a sound. See, I'm thinking, she said, that Crow doesn't have 11 loyal soldiers down there. See, he has 11 men he's paying, and paying men have conditions, and one of the conditions is usually that they believe they can complete the job and go home. See, so if they can't complete the job, she said, and they know they can't complete it, and they're being asked to take real casualties for a banker who's sitting in Ash Hollow while they freeze on a mountain, what does that do to their commitment? See, Calder stared at her. Something moved in his face, not quite surprise, more like the specific quality of a man who has been alone long enough to forget that other people can think strategically too. See, you'd need to make the cost visible, he said. I know, she said. See, she looked at the door. She looked at the iron poker hanging beside the hearth, the same one she'd held through that first night. See, she picked it up. Martha, I am not hiding in the back room, she said. See, she said it without heat, without drama, in the same tone she used when she told Ben he could keep his rocks another day. See, it was simply what was true. Thomas is at the window. See, you are wounded. They are 12 men who expect to find a frightened woman. She looked at him. See, let them find out what they actually have. Calder looked at her for a long moment. See, he looked at her size not as a liability, not as something to be managed or worked around, but as a fact, the way the cliff face behind the cabin was a fact, something to be incorporated into the calculation. See, the bolt, he said. When you go out, don't go to the left of the door. See, there's a man at the oak tree at your left who has a clean angle. See, she nodded. Martha, he said. She looked back. Stay on the porch, he said. See, make them come to you. She opened the door. The cold hit her face immediately, the sharp, clean cold of the ridge, the specific cold of high mountain winter that does not apologize for itself. See, she stepped onto the porch with the poker in her right hand, and she looked down the yard at the riders below the fence line, and she stood there. See, they saw her. The argument she'd heard through the cabin wall stopped. See, she was not a small woman. She was never a small woman. See, she had been told her entire life, in the various ways that communities find to tell a woman such things, that her size was a problem too much, too heavy, too imposing, taking up too much space in rooms that preferred her smaller. See, standing on the porch of a mountain cabin with a fired iron poker in her hand and 12 men below the fence line, Martha Bellamy discovered with a clarity that was almost funny, see, that every single thing she had ever been told about her size had been told to her by people who had never needed her to be large. See, one of Crow's men made the decision to test her. He came through the gate at a run, closing the distance fast, and Martha stepped off the porch to meet him and swung the poker in a single, weight-driven arc that connected with his forearm hard enough that the sound of it reached the other 11 men clearly. See, he went sideways off the steps, with his arm bent wrong and his rifle somewhere else. And Martha put her foot on the rifle and looked at the remaining 11 men and waited. See, nobody moved for 3 full seconds. Then Thomas's voice came from the window behind her. See, second man from the left has his gun up. She didn't look. See, she trusted it. Put it down, she said to the man Thomas had identified. See, not loud, not performing. The same tone she'd used with the deputy in Ash Hollow. See, this is what will happen. The man hesitated. From the window, the sound of a rifle being cocked. See, the man lowered his gun. Below the fence, the argument had restarted louder now, and no longer directed at the cabin. See, Crow's voice trying to cut through it, and other voices not yielding. See, she heard fragments, not what we signed for and wounded, and she still came out, and from one voice with specific clarity, Denver. See, he said, Denver already has it. What are we even doing here? See, she stood on her porch in the cold and let them argue. See, Luther Crow rode forward to the fence line. See, she could see him clearly for the first time, lean and weathered, a man in his 40s with a professional's stillness, the kind of stillness that comes from spending decades in a business where unnecessary movement draws attention. See, he looked at her with a flat, appraising expression. See, not afraid, but reassessing. You the widow, he said. See, Martha Rusk, she said, this is my property. Those are my children in that cabin. See, and the man who hired you is going to be in federal custody before the snow thaws, which means you are currently working for a man who will not be able to pay you. See, Crow's jaw moved. She saw it the small muscular adjustment of a man running numbers. See, how certain are you about Denver, he said. Certain enough to stand on this porch, she said. See, a long pause. The wind moved through the yard. One of the horses below stamped its feet. See, then the sound she'd been listening for, the specific sound of men who have made a collective decision, which is different from men still deciding. See, horses turning, equipment adjusting, the reorganization of a group that is no longer moving toward something. See, Crow looked at her one more time. He was not a man who gave ground easily. She could see that in the set of his face, in the way the reassessment cost him something. See, he looked at her the way someone looks at a calculation that came out differently than they expected, and he was deciding how to carry that. See, tell Vane, she said, that the ridge sends its regards. See, Crow turned his horse. He rode back through his men, and through them, and down the approach trail, and one by one the 11 riders followed, and then there were none, and the yard of Blackthorn Ridge was quiet under the flat winter sky. See, and Martha Bellamy stood on her porch with an iron poker and let out a breath that had been gathering for considerably longer than the last hour. See, behind her, the door opened. Calder came out, left hand on the door frame, right shoulder packed and held, and he stood beside her and looked at the empty approach trail, and for a moment neither of them said anything. See, they'll report back to Vane, he said finally. Yes, she said. See, he'll have to decide whether to send more. He will, she said. See, and he'll have to decide quickly, because Denver isn't waiting. See, Calder looked at her. The pale gray eyes, the scar in the winter light, the expression that was learning, slowly, to say more than it used to. See, you came out anyway, he said, with 12 of them. See, you went out every night with grizzlies, she said. See, with no one knowing where you were. He was quiet for a moment. See, I had a reason to stop being alone, he said. It came out more plainly than he'd intended. She thought less controlled than his usual speech, the kind of sentence that escapes before the speaker has fully decided to release it. See, Martha looked at him sideways, at the man who had ridden out of the mountain fog with a bag of gold and a declaration that had silenced a town square. See, at the man who had carried her daughter for 3 hours and fixed a dead child's toy and slept with his boots on and sent a rider to Denver before she knew she needed one. See, the picture she'd been building was not finished. It might not be finished for years, she thought. See, some pictures took years, but it was good work, and it was hers to finish if she chose to. See, come inside, she said. That shoulder needs to be looked at properly. See, she held the door for him. He went through it. Inside, the fire was still burning, and from the back room she could hear the sound of 7 children who were alive and together. See, and the sounds were ordinary argument and shuffling feet and Ben explaining his rock classification system to what appeared to be a captive Ruth. And Martha Bellamy closed the door of her cabin against the cold of Blackthorn Ridge and put the iron poker back in its place beside the hearth and rolled up her sleeves. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, the work felt like it was hers in a way that meant something not survival, not emergency, not holding together what was already falling apart, but building. Actual building. The slow, unglamorous, necessary work of making something that might last. Outside, somewhere below the ridge, Luther Crow was riding toward Ash Hollow with a report that Orson Vane was not going to want to hear. And in Denver, in offices that neither Martha nor Calder could see, a package was sitting on a desk that was going to change the shape of everything still to come. Calder's shoulder healed the way he did most things without complaint and slower than he admitted. Martha had cleaned and packed it that same evening. Working by firelight with the focused competence of a woman who had set broken fingers and stitched cut hands and managed 6 weeks of sole responsibility for 7 children without a doctor within 2 days' ride. She had done what she could, which was considerable, and she had told him plainly that the shoulder needed 2 weeks of limited use, and he had said nothing, which she had learned to interpret as neither agreement nor disagreement, but simply the response of a man who was going to do what the situation required, regardless of what his shoulder needed. He lasted 4 days before he was back at full activity. She did not say, "I told you so." She said, "If that tear's open, I'm not fixing it a second time," which was a lie but a lie, with a point in it, and he looked at her with the sideways expression that was becoming familiar and said nothing, which was also becoming familiar, and went back to work. The children noticed the change in him before Martha fully named it herself. It was Daniel who mentioned it first, not to Martha but to Thomas, overheard through the thin partition between the main room and the back, that Calder's face was different lately. Thomas had said, "What do you mean?" And Daniel had said, "I don't know," like he's less far away, and then apparently realized he'd said something that felt important and changed the subject immediately to something about the axle work. The way 10-year-old boys retreat from emotional accuracy the moment they accidentally achieve it. Martha thought about that. Less far away. It was a child's language for something she'd been watching happen in increments too small to name individually, the way Calder had started responding to questions at the dinner table, rather than answering and returning to silence. The way he'd started remaining in the main room in the evenings instead of going directly outside after the meal. The way 2 nights ago he'd told the twins a story about a winter he'd spent trapping in the Sangre de Cristos. A story that had grown from a brief answer to Daniel's question about the coldest he'd ever been into something that lasted 40 minutes and involved considerable detail about a mule named Absalom who had opinions about river crossings. The twins had been enraptured. Calder had told the story with the slightly rusty quality of someone unaccustomed to the shape of it, the pacing slightly off. The natural stopping points, not quite where an experienced storyteller would put them, but with enough genuine material that the roughness didn't matter. He'd been there, he remembered it, and somewhere in the telling, Martha had watched his face do the thing that faces do when a person realizes, mid-sentence, that they are enjoying themselves. He'd looked briefly startled by it. She'd kept her eyes on the sock she was mending. Thomas had noticed too. Thomas, who had been conducting his extended assessment of Calder with the patience and thoroughness of a boy who has learned that the world rewards careful observation over quick conclusions, appeared in those days to be arriving at something. He didn't announce it. He didn't change his behavior dramatically. But Martha began to notice small adjustments, Thomas asking Calder a question before going to her with it. The particular way he positioned himself in the yard when they were working on the fence repair, closer than he needed to be for the work itself. The way he handed the rifle back after practice with a word of thanks that sounded like it actually meant something. The afternoon of the 14th day, she came outside to find Thomas and Calder at the fence sunk in a conversation that stopped when she appeared not guiltily, but with the particular interruption of 2 people who had been talking about something and weren't finished. See, she kept walking to the woodpile. When she came back, the conversation had resumed in a lower register, and she caught only a fragment. Thomas's voice saying he never talked about the mine much, even before, and Calder's response too low to hear. See, they were talking about Silas. She carried the wood inside and sat down at the table and stared at the grain for a moment. See, the grief she'd been managing since the funeral, the managed functional grief of a woman who could not afford to stop, had a different quality these days. See, less like something she was holding back and more like something she was living alongside. See, it was still heavy. It was still there every morning when she woke up, and Silas wasn't, and every time Thomas pressed his lips together in that specific way, and every time she opened the almanac and saw his notes in the margins. See, but it had stopped being an emergency and had become a companion, which is not the same as healing, but is perhaps its necessary precondition. See, she was grateful, in a complicated way she hadn't expected to feel, that Calder had known Silas. See, even briefly, even imperfectly. See, there was something specific about the relief of being in a house where her husband's name could be spoken without the particular discomfort that Ash Hollow had already begun to apply to it, the town's discomfort with a grief that went on longer. See, than the socially allocated period, the way women who mourn too visibly become an inconvenience to the people around them. See, here, Silas was just Silas, a man who had come up the ridge twice, who had forgotten his map, who had written a note at the bottom of a survey that said Martha will know what to do. See, that was enough for a man to be real in a house. It was enough. See, 3 days after the attack, when the shoulder had stopped bleeding through its packing and the ridge had returned to its ordinary rhythms, Calder sat down across from her in the evening and said, without preamble, see, I need to tell you something about the night Silas died. See, Martha set down the mending. I know more than I told you at the overhang, he said. See, he said it looking at the table, with the particular quality of a man who has been deciding how to say something for a while and has not fully arrived at the decision even now. See, at the time I told you what I knew, but there are parts I held back. See, not because they weren't true, because I wasn't certain how you'd receive them. See, tell me now, she said. He looked up. Silas knew someone was following him when he came up the second time. See, he said it without elaborating the way men mention things they don't want to make real by discussing. See, he was watching the trail behind him more than the trail ahead. Calder's hands were flat on the table. See, he asked me to hold the map. He said if anything happens to me, get this to someone who isn't vain. See, those were his words. Someone who isn't vain, not someone in Ash Hollow. See, just someone outside Vane's reach. Martha was very still. See, he knew, she said. He suspected, Calder said, he didn't know. See, but he'd found the vein and he'd found the discrepancy in the property records. Whoever had surveyed the land before had buried something. And Silas had found what they buried, and he knew enough to be afraid. A pause. See, he mentioned you. More than once in the 2 visits. See, he mentioned you the way people mention the thing they're most worried about losing. See, Martha did not cry. See, she sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the fire and held what Calder had just put in her hands, the weight of it. The particular weight of knowing that Silas had been afraid for her, specifically, had been afraid for their children. See, had done what he could with the time he had, and the resources available, which was not much, but was not nothing. See, why didn't you come down sooner, she asked. Not angrily. See, the same question as before, but with more information now. See, after I heard about his death, I sent 2 letters, Calder said. See, to the county office in Glenwood and to the territorial office in Denver. See, neither produced any response. Vane has reached outside Ash Hollow, I knew that, and those letters confirmed it. See, by the time I understood what was actually happening, the debt notice, the timeline, what Vane was setting up, you had 4 days. He looked at her. See, I came as fast as I could with what I had. She thought about the 4 days. See, about the $89 and Tom Garrett's eyes and the Wharton family conveniently in Denver. See, about what those 4 days had felt like from inside them. See, you could have written to me, she said. I could have, he said. See, I wasn't certain. I didn't know how much Vane was watching your correspondence. See, a letter from the ridge, from a man you'd apparently never met, About a debt and a mine, that's something he could have intercepted and used. He paused. See, I made the decision to come in person. I may have made it later than I should have. See, she looked at him. At the man who had organized a rider in gold and a proposal in the time it took the rest of Ash Hollow to look at its windows and feel complicated about things. See, you said may have, she said. I might be wrong about the letter, he said. See, I often think I've made the right call and I'm wrong. See, I was alone up here for 7 years. My judgment about what other people need is not always calibrated. See, it was the most uncertain thing she'd heard him say. See, he said it with the blunt honesty of someone who has thought about it enough to know it's true and hasn't yet decided whether that truth is forgivable. See, it's calibrating, she said. He looked at her. Your judgment, she said. See, about what people need. It's getting better. She picked up the mending. See, the toy horse. The oilcloth for Joseph's boot. The story about the mule. She looked up at him. See, those weren't wrong calls. He was quiet for a moment, in a way that was different from his usual quiet. See, less contained. She could see him receiving the information without quite knowing where to put it, the way a person looks when kindness lands in a place that hasn't had practice receiving it. See, the mule story ran long, he said. The twins loved it, she said. See, Daniel asked Thomas about it the next morning. Thomas pretended not to have been listening. She paused. See, he had been listening. Something moved in Calder's face. See, the same thing she'd seen when he watched Nell carry the wooden horse across the yard, that open, unguarded quality that appeared when he forgot to prevent it. See, he's a good boy, Calder said. The words came out simply, without preface, and she understood he didn't mean it as flattery or as an assessment she'd solicited. See, he just meant it as a thing that was true, stated plainly because it was true. See, he's his father's son, Martha said. He's yours too, Calder said. See, the steadiness, the way he watches before he decides. See, that's not Silas or not only Silas. Martha looked at her mending for a moment. See, she was aware of the warmth in the room, the settled sound of the fire, the deep quiet of the ridge outside. A quiet she was beginning to know the vocabulary of. See, the difference between the quiet that meant nothing and the quiet that meant weather coming, the quiet that meant animals moving somewhere, the quiet that meant a mountain at night, simply being a mountain at night. See, you knew his father better than I realized, she said. See, 2 conversations, Calder said. But Silas he was clear, see, in himself. Some people you talk to twice and you know who they are. See, he was that kind. Yes, Martha said. He was. The conversation ended there. Not because it was finished, but because some conversations are complete before they conclude, and sitting together in the remaining warmth of it was its own continuation. See, it was on the 17th day that Harlan Spade came back. See, Martha heard the horse first a single rider coming up the approach at a speed that was urgent without being panicked, the specific tempo of someone carrying news they want to deliver before it changes. See, she was at the window before Calder reached the door, and she saw the roan mare and the rider who sat it with the slightly forward lean of a man who has spent many days in the saddle recently. See, Calder went out to meet him. Martha put on her coat and followed. See, Harlan Spade was a lean, weathered man of 50 or so with a beard that had gone past careful and into simply present. See, and eyes that had the quality of someone who has ridden fast through uncertain country and is still listening for sounds behind him. See, he swung down from the roan and shook Calder's hand with the grip of a man reassuring himself that the person he's delivering to is actually alive. See, made it there and back in 15 days, he said. See, wasn't sure I could make the return this fast, but the South Pass was open. See, Denver, Calder said. Denver. Spade glanced at Martha, and Calder said Martha Rusk, and Spade nodded to her with the brief, practical acknowledgement of a man in a hurry to get through information. See, the package went to Commissioner Aldridge's office directly. See, I stood in front of a clerk for 4 hours before anyone would look at it, and then Aldridge himself came out. He paused. See, he knew the name Bellamy, and he knew the name Vane. See, Martha felt something shift in the room that was not yet relief. It was the precondition of relief. The moment before it, when you understand it might be coming. See, what did he say? She asked. He said the Bellamy property record has been under informal review for 6 months, Spade said. See, He didn't say why or by whom. But when I put down the survey and the debt documentation, he set them side by side with papers that were already in a folder on his desk, and his expression was Spade looked for the word. See, satisfied. The kind of satisfied that looks a little bit like anger. See, he's moving, Calder said. He has moved, Spade said. See, investigators left Denver for Ash Hollow 12 days ago. See, different route than mine faster. They should already be there. See, Martha looked at Calder. Calder looked at Martha 12 days ago, she said. See, they've been in Ash Hollow for up to a week, Calder said. See, depending on weather and road. She thought about Orson Vane. See, about his precise face and his gold-lettered door and the two-finger flick that had directed deputies toward her son. See, she thought about the particular quality of a man who has been doing something carefully and invisibly for long enough that he's stopped truly believing he can be stopped. See, she thought about what it feels like to have that belief taken away. See, he doesn't know yet, she said. Or if he does, he only recently found out. See, which means the timeline is Calder started. Collapsing, she said. See, for him. Spade had been watching this exchange with the alert patience of a man following a conversation in a language he mostly speaks. See, there's one more thing, he said. He reached into his coat and produced an envelope sealed, official, the quality of paper that comes from government offices rather than general stores. See, he held it out to Martha. She looked at the address on the front. See, Mrs. Martha Bellamy. See, care of Harlan Spade. See, Blackthorn Ridge. See, Colorado Territory. See, written in a clerk's hand, deliberate and formal. She opened it. See, it was 2 pages. Legal language, precise and dense, but she was a good reader and she read it straight through without slowing. See, when she finished, she read the 2nd page again. See, what is it? Calder asked. She looked up the Bellamy property, she said. See, Commissioner Aldridge is issuing a formal hold on any transfer or seizure of the property pending investigation. See, the hold is retroactive to the date of the original debt notice. She folded the pages carefully. See, the debt Vane claimed is flagged as fraudulent pending review. See, the children's placement, the order to indenture them, is suspended and under review as having been issued by a compromised counsel. See, she heard the words coming out of her own mouth, and they were correct and she'd read them correctly. And they were still slightly unreal, the specific unreality of something you've needed so badly for so long that when it appears in official, see, language on paper, you have to read it twice to believe it's not something else. See, it's not final, she said. She needed to say that. See, she needed to not let herself land on it before it was solid. See, investigation, review. It's not finished. No, Calder agreed. See, but it started. And it started with the right people. See, Spade accepted the coffee Clara had brought out with the appreciation of a man who has been riding in the cold for 15 days and is not going to pretend he's above gratitude. See, he sat at the table and talked through what he'd seen in Denver. The composition of the investigator team, the urgency Aldridge had applied to the matter. See, the specific fact that the commissioner had asked Spade 3 times whether there were children involved and had written something down each time. Spade said yes. See, children do something to these proceedings, Spade said. See, when it's just property and money, the wheels turn on their own schedule. See, when there are children who were nearly sold off to pay a man's forged debts, he shook his head. See, Aldridge had a face like a man who's been waiting for a reason to move on Vane for a while. See, the 6-month informal review, Martha said. You said Aldridge already had a folder with Bellamy papers. See, he did, Spade said. I don't know where they came from. See, he didn't say. Martha looked at Calder. He was looking at his coffee. See, did you send something before the rider? She asked. See, a pause that lasted exactly 1 beat too long to be fully innocent. See, earlier in the year, he said, before Silas died. See, I sent a general inquiry about Vane's acquisition pattern, the properties he'd foreclosed on, the timing relative to deaths or accidents among the owners. He looked up. See, I didn't have the survey then. I just had a pattern that looked wrong. See, Martha stared at him. You were investigating Vane before I knew Silas was in danger, she said. See, I was noticing something and asking whether anyone official had also noticed it, he said. See, I didn't know about Silas specifically. I knew about 3 other families in the county who'd lost property to Vane in circumstances that had a similar shape. See, She thought about that. A man on a mountain, alone, with no stake in the valley below except the valley's proximity to the ridge he was trying to protect, noticing a pattern of harm and sending a letter about it to a government office. See, a letter that 6 months later was sitting in a folder being referenced by a commissioner who recognized the name Bellamy. See, the chain of it, how long it went back, how many things had to happen in what sequence for her children to be asleep in a safe cabin instead of scattered across farms and merchant houses across the territory. See, you didn't tell me that either, she said. No, he said. See, why he was quiet. The particular thing quiet, not the deflecting quiet. See, because it would have sounded like I was asking for credit, he said. See, and I wasn't. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and because I live here, and what Vane was doing wasn't going to stop at my fence line eventually. See, not as a favor to you. I didn't know you. She looked at him for a long moment. See, at the honesty of that, the refusal to retroactively frame his actions as more generous than they were in the moment. See, the precision about his own motivations that was rare in a person, and rarer still in a person being asked to account for themselves in a favorable light. See, I know, she said. That's why I'm not angry. He blinked. See, it was such a small movement she might have missed it, but she didn't miss it. And what it told her was that he had been braced for anger, had considered it a reasonable outcome of this disclosure, had decided to tell her anyway. See, she filed it carefully. Spade left the next morning, rested and reprovisioned, with a letter from Martha to Commissioner Aldridge confirming the family's location and well-being and the attack by Crow's men, see, which she wrote in her own clear hand at the kitchen table, and which Calder read over her shoulder without comment, except once to correct a date, which she adjusted without discussion. See, the following days had a different quality again, not the held breath of the first week, not the active defensive alertness of the siege period, but something that Martha could only describe as a settlement. See, not comfort, not yet too much, was still unresolved. The investigation still moving in Denver, Vane still in Ash Hollow with whatever options he had left, the legal status of the property still pending. See, but the feeling that the situation was now moving in a direction, rather than simply accumulating pressure with no release. See, Thomas began helping Calder with the structural work on the barn's east wall, which had a section of timber that had been in Calder's mental repair queue for what appeared to be 2 seasons. See, they worked through the cold mornings with a competence that was increasingly shared, Calder doing the heavy structural work, Thomas doing the precise finishing work that his younger hands and sharper eyes managed better. See, they didn't talk continuously. They worked in a rhythm that had developed without either of them designing it, the way working relationships develop between people who understand each other's pace. See, Martha watched this and felt something that was not quite happiness, but was in its general vicinity. See, the twins had by this point fully colonized the woodshed as a secondary territory, and were using it for purposes that Martha suspected included things Calder either didn't know about or was choosing not to investigate. See, she chose not to investigate either. They were safe. See, they were together. The specific noise they generated, which had initially required adjustment for a man accustomed to the sounds of a mountain, appeared to have stopped registering as remarkable, even to Calder, which was its own kind of integration. See, Ruth continued her inventory work with the satisfaction of a person doing exactly the work their nature equips them for. See, she had extended her operations from the root cellar to the smokehouse, and had presented Martha with a comparative analysis of winter food supplies versus projected consumption that was both genuinely useful and slightly alarming in its precision. See, Martha had shown it to Calder, who had read it carefully and said she missed the second salt cache behind the northern shelf, which Ruth had received not as criticism but as data, and had gone immediately to inspect and annotate. See, she's going to run something significant someday, Calder said. See, she is. Martha agreed. Clara got her room. It took a full afternoon of moving equipment, with Thomas and both twins and a level of logistical difficulty that nobody had fully anticipated. See, and the result was a small space that was not large by any reasonable measure and smelled initially of sawdust and old canvas, but was Clara's. See, Calder had fitted a simple latch on the door without being asked to. See, which Clara had tested 3 times and then looked at with an expression that Martha recognized the specific expression of someone receiving something they'd needed for long enough that receiving it feels almost suspicious. See, thank you, Clara said. See, she said it to Calder directly, which was notable because Clara had been the slowest of the children to direct anything at him, managing him instead with the careful peripheral awareness of a teenager who's not yet certain of something. See, Calder said your room in a tone that meant obviously, what else would it be, which was exactly the right response and which Clara seemed to understand as such, because something in her face eased. See, it was Ben who produced the conversation Martha least expected. See, Ben was 6, and he operated primarily through action and through rock classification and through the specific emotional transparency of a child, young enough that his feelings surfaced directly and without mediation. See, he had over the weeks on the ridge, see, attached himself to Calder in the particular way that the youngest unsuspecting boys attach to large men who do not perform gentleness, but simply are not frightening, a gravitational attachment, unsentimental and total. See, one evening Calder was working at the table on something equipment repair, something mechanical, and Ben appeared at his elbow and watched for a while, and then said, see, with the conversational jump of a 6-year-old who has been thinking about something for a while without announcing it, "Are you going to be our papa now?" See, the room went very still. Clara, who was nearest, found something urgent to look at in the direction of the window. See, Thomas, from the bench near the fire, pressed his lips together. See, Calder looked at Ben, at the 6-year-old face that was asking with the absolute directness of a child who hasn't yet learned that some questions have complicated answers. See, your papa was Silas Bellamy, Calder said. He was a good man. See, I knew him a little. He loved your mama and he loved all of you. See, that doesn't change. He held the boy's gaze steadily. See, what I am is your mama and I made an agreement. See, I mean to keep it. So I'll be here, whatever that means to you. He paused. See, that's an honest answer. I'm not going to give you a better one than that. See, Ben considered this with the focused processing of a 6-year-old sorting new information. See, okay, he said finally. And then can I watch you fix that? See, pull the stool closer, Calder said. Martha turned to the stove and kept her hands moving and her back to the room because her face was doing something she wasn't ready to share with the general population of the cabin. See, 3 weeks after the attack, the rider came from Ash Hollow. See, not Spade this time, a younger man, hired carrying a sealed envelope from the Ash Hollow post rider. See, he arrived in the morning and didn't come up the ridge himself, but left the envelope with a marker on the lower trail, which was how messages to Blackthorn Ridge apparently worked by local custom that Martha was only now learning. See, Calder retrieved it. He handed it to Martha unopened. See, she opened it. It was from a man named Warren Gould, who identified himself as acting county administrator, not a name she recognized, which meant he had not been there before. See, in plain, careful language, he informed her that territorial investigators had arrived in Ash Hollow 21 days prior. See, that Judge Ferris had been removed from his position pending review of his conduct in the Bellamy property proceedings. See, that 2 members of the county council had resigned. See, that Orson Vane had been taken into formal custody 4 days ago on charges of fraud, falsification of property records, bribery of public officials, and here the language became more careful, more hedged. See, the language of something still being built and additional charges under active investigation related to the death of Silas Bellamy. See, the Bellamy property, Gould wrote, was formally restored to the Bellamy family estate effective immediately, the fraudulent debt instruments having been nullified by the Territorial Commissioner's Office. See, he invited Mrs. Bellamy to contact his office at her earliest convenience to begin the process of formal documentation. See, he signed it Acting County Administrator Warren Gould, and then added, in slightly different ink as if he'd thought of it after, the children are legally restored as heirs. See, no one has authority to touch that. Martha read the letter twice. See, then she set it on the table. The fire was going. Outside, she could hear the twins in the woodshed doing something that involved rhythmic banging. See, Ruth was in the corner with her inventory lists. Ben was somewhere near Calder's workbench. See, Clara was in her room, which was hers, and the latch was on. See, Thomas was watching her from across the table. She handed him the letter. See, she watched him read it, watched his face, go through the same things her face had gone through. Only faster, because he was 16, and his feelings still traveled at the speed they arrived rather than the speed she'd learned to manage them. See, Vane's in custody, he said, yes, and Papa's death. See, under investigation, she said. That's not finished. See, it may take a long time, but it's moving. Thomas looked at the letter. See, he looked at it the way people look at things that contain too much to hold in one look. See, then he set it down and looked at his hands on the table, and Martha watched him do something she hadn't seen him do. Since the funeral, she watched him not hold it together. See, not collapse, not fall apart, but let something cross his face that had been behind the pressed lips' steadiness for weeks, something that was grief and relief and exhaustion and 16 years old, all arriving at once. See, she put her hand over his on the table. He didn't pull away. See, they sat like that for a while, long enough for the fire to shift and settle. See, long enough for the banging from the woodshed to stop and start again. See, long enough for Martha to feel the particular weight of a sentence that had been hanging over everything. This might not work. They might win. You might lose them finally, not disappear, but change shape into something that was past tense. See, might had become didn't. That was not the same as everything is fine. See, she knew that. There was work ahead, legal work, the mine, the property, the winter still in progress, the long, slow business of building a life in a place from a starting position of nearly nothing. See, none of that was resolved. None of it was easy. See, but the thing she'd been holding against since the notice was nailed to her door, the specific terror of losing her children, of watching them dispersed into other people's houses and other people's purposes. See, of failing the fundamental task of keeping her family together, that thing was done. See, she had kept them together. She had kept them together through debt and mountain passes and armed men and one terrible night with an iron poker on a porch. And she had kept them together. See, and now they were legal heirs to land their father had died for. And nobody had the authority to take that from them. See, she heard Calder come in from outside, the specific sound of his boots, which she had learned the way you learn the sounds of a house. The way a house becomes yours when you can identify its sounds without looking. See, he came in and stopped inside the door, reading the room with the instinctive situational awareness of a man who doesn't walk into things unready. See, he saw Thomas's face. He saw Martha's hand on Thomas's. See, he saw the letter on the table. He crossed to the table and picked up the letter and read it standing. See, when he was done, he set it back down. He looked at Martha. See, she looked at him. See, there was nothing to say that would fit in the space where the words would have to go. So neither of them said anything. And that was fine. That was correct. Actually, because some things don't need language, and forcing them into it diminishes them. See, and Martha had been alive long enough to know the difference between silence that is empty and silence that is full. See, Thomas stood up after a while. He straightened his spine, that Silas move, that gathering of self, and he said, with a steadiness that had something new in it, see, something that came from the other side of being 16 and learning that the world can do its worst, and you can still be standing. We should tell the others. See, go, Martha said. He went. The sound of Thomas's voice in the back room, and then the specific sound of the twins receiving news, which was a volume-based experience, and Ruth's voice, precise and already asking a follow-up question, see, and Ben's voice saying something she couldn't make out, and Clara's door opening, and the sound of all of them, her family, together on a mountain, alive and legal and whole. See, Calder sat down across from her. He put his hands flat on the table and looked at them, and then he looked at her. See, it's not over, he said. The investigation for Silas will take time. See, the mine has to be formally surveyed and claimed. The property documentation will be months of work. See, I know, she said. Vane has lawyers, he said. Good ones, probably. See, he'll fight what he can. I know, she said. And the ridge is going to be a hard winter still, he said. See, the February storms here they're serious. We're not through it yet. See, she looked at him. At the man who catalogued obstacles the way other men catalogued assets, not from pessimism. She understood now. See, but from the deep habit of someone who has learned that the only way to be genuinely prepared is to refuse to look away from what's coming. See, Calder, she said. He stopped. I know, she said. See, all of it. I know. She held his gaze, and I'm still here. See, he was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the noise of 7 children receiving good news continued in the specific unselfconscious register of people who have been carrying something heavy and have just been allowed to put it down. See, so am I, he said. It was not a romantic declaration. See, it was not poetic. It was 2 people who had made an agreement in a town square under terrible circumstances and had spent weeks finding out whether the agreement could hold weight. See, and the answer that was emerging slowly, imperfectly, with work still ahead was yes. See, it was enough. It was, Martha thought, exactly enough. See, she got up and went to tell her children to come to supper, and the cabin on Blackthorn Ridge was loud and warm and full of voices, and outside the Colorado winter was doing what it did, and none of that was that easy, and none of it was finished. See, and she would not have traded any of it for the quiet she'd had before. See, February on Blackthorn Ridge was exactly what Calder had warned it would be. See, the storms came in from the northwest with a seriousness that was different from the cold of December and January, less a presence than a declaration, the mountain asserting something about itself that it had been holding in reserve. See, for 4 days in the second week of February, the snow came so thick and continuous that the barn was invisible from the cabin door, and the world contracted to the space between the 4 walls and the fire. See, and all 8 of them lived inside that contraction without much choice about it. See, this produced, inevitably, friction. The twins, confined to interior space for 96 hours, developed a conflict about territory and noise levels that escalated through 3 stages before Martha intervened with the specific authority of a woman who had been managing this particular kind of conflict for 10 years and was not interested in its 4th stage. Ben's rock collection was reorganized without his consent by Ruth, who had decided the previous system was inefficient. And the resulting dispute lasted 2 days and required a formal boundary negotiation that Ruth conducted with the gravity of a territorial commissioner and Ben participated in with the wounded dignity of a landowner. Clara's latch was tested extensively during the storm days, not because anyone was trying to enter, but because Clara had apparently decided that the latch's existence was itself the point. And exercising it was her right, which Martha thought was entirely correct. Nell, untroubled by the storm, spent the 4 days reorganizing the cabin's lower surfaces according to a logic entirely her own, moving objects from one location to another with the focused purpose of a 2-year-old engaged in very serious work. The carved wooden horse was exempt from reorganization. It went everywhere with her and stayed exactly where Nell put it. Calder moved through all of this with the slightly adapted quality of a man who had calculated for winter confinement as a solo experience and was now experiencing it as something else entirely. He was not, Martha observed, miserable. He was adjusting, which is different the specific going adjustment of a person learning that the sounds of other people, even when those sounds are the twins arguing, and Ben's aggrieved monologue about the rock reclassification system, are not the same as noise. They are evidence of presence, and presence, after 7 years without it, takes getting used to in both directions. On the 3rd storm day, when the light through the window was the flat gray-white of heavy snow still falling, and the cabin had been at close quarters long enough that everyone's patience was operating on reduced reserves. Calder sat down at the table with a piece of paper and began drawing something. He drew without announcement, without explaining what he was doing, in the quiet, focused way he did most things. Within 10 minutes, Daniel was at his elbow. Within 15, Joseph. Within 20, Ruth had abandoned the rock boundary negotiation and appeared at his other side. He was drawing the ridge. Not a map, exactly a sketch, detailed and spatial, showing the cabin and the barn and the cliff face and the approach trail and the terrain below, with the mine property indicated to the south and Ash Hollow implied at the bottom edge. He drew with the ease of someone reproducing something he knows by direct experience rather than copying. What's this part? Daniel asked, pointing to a section of the sketch. See, secondary approach from the east, Calder said. It's longer, but it avoids the main trail. See, good to know. Why? Because the main trail is where people who want to find you will look, Calder said. See. The secondary approach is where you go when you don't want to be found, or when you need to come at something from a direction it's not expecting. See, Ruth studied the sketch with her analytical intensity. See, the mine property is bigger than I thought, she said. See, it is, Calder said. How do we work it, she said. See, she said we without hesitation, without apparent awareness that she was doing it, with the total casualness of a child who has decided without ceremony that a thing is hers and proceeds accordingly. See, Calder looked at her. That's going to take some thinking, he said. See, and some decisions your mother will make. Ruth looked at Martha, who was at the stove listening to all of this without turning around. See, Mama, how do we work the mine? We hire people who know how, Martha said. See, people who work for fair wages and have contracts that protect them. See, and we do it after the legal work is finished and after the investigation is closed. See, how long will that take? Ruth asked. I don't know exactly, Martha said. See, Ruth accepted this with the equanimity of a person who has learned that uncertainty is data, not failure. See, she went back to studying the sketch. We should start thinking about it now, she said. So we're ready when we do know. See, write down your questions, Calder said, all of them. See, when we have answers, we'll fill them in. Ruth's face did the thing it did when someone gave her exactly the right tool for the work she was already doing. See, she went and got her flour sack paper and her pencil and sat down at the table with the sketch between them and began writing questions with the focused speed of someone who had been accumulating them for a while. See, Calder watched her for a moment. Then he went back to adding detail to the sketch. See, Martha turned from the stove and looked at the two of them at the table, the scarred mountain man and the 8-year-old girl with her pencil and her serious eyes working together in the quiet, see, mutually useful way of people who understand each other's minds. And she thought about what a family actually is when you strip away the legal language and the social expectation and the forms it's supposed to take. See, it is people who show up in the same space repeatedly and do the work of being present. And over time, the presence accumulates into something that has weight and structure and warmth. See, and you don't always see it being built because it's being built in the small moments, the inventory check, the sketch at the table, the oilcloth boot wrap, the mule story, and then one day you look up and it's there. See, that was what she was looking at. The storm broke on the 4th day. See, the light changed first a shift from flat gray to something with direction in it. Actual light coming from an actual sun somewhere above the cloud cover, and then the snow thinned to flurries and then to nothing. See, and the ridge emerged from its 4 days of white and gray into a kind of startling clarity, everything sharp-edged and bright, the sky going from white to a blue, so deep it looked painted. See, the twins were outside within 3 minutes of the storm breaking. See, Martha did not stop them. She stood on the porch in the post-storm quiet and breathed the particular air of a mountain after heavy snow, cold and clean, with a slight smell of pine resin that was somehow more present after snow. See, as if the cold intensified it, and she thought about Warren Gould's letter and Commissioner Aldridge and the investigation that was presumably still moving forward in Ash Hollow. See, she had been thinking about going down, not permanently, see, not leaving the ridge, but going down when the roads were passable to handle the legal work Gould had mentioned, and to be present for whatever the investigation required, and to look at her property, the Bellamy property, see, hers and her children's, with her own eyes for the first time since Vane had been arrested. See, she mentioned this to Calder that evening. He was quiet for a moment. See, when? When the South Pass is clear enough for the wagon, she said. See, 4 or 5 days maybe, if the temperature holds. See, all of you, he asked. The older ones, she said. See, Thomas, Clara. Ruth, probably she'll want to see the mine property herself, and I'd rather she see it than make it larger in her imagination than it is. She paused. See, you should come. He looked at her. To Ash Hollow. See, you have legal standing in this now, as my husband. See, and your testimony about what Silas told you may be part of the investigation. She held his gaze. See, also I want you there. He looked at the table for a moment. See, She could see him running the calculation, which, with Calder, was never entirely separable from the practical who stays with the younger children, who watches the ridge. See, what does going to Ash Hollow require of a man who has not been there in some years? See, Spade can come up for the week, Calder said. He's done it before. See, he knows the ridge routine. Then it's settled, Martha said. See, you're not asking, he said. Not accusatory, just noting it. See. No, she said. I'm telling you what I need, and I'm assuming you'll tell me if it's impossible. She looked at him. See, that's how this works between us. That's how I need it to work. See, he was quiet for a beat. That works for me, he said. See. Good, she said. She went to bed and lay awake for a while, not from anxiety, but from the particular alertness of someone approaching something they've been moving toward for a long time. See, going back to Ash Hollow was not the same as it had been before. See, she knew that. The town had watched Vane drag her family toward destruction and had made its collectives about how much to intervene. See, and she carried that knowledge the way you carry a specific kind of disappointment, not forgotten, not consuming, just present. See, but the town was also where Garrett had given $12 and couldn't meet her eyes, which meant he knew he should have given more and probably knew it still. See, it was where Pastor Hale's widow had pressed her hand. See, it was where people had stood at their windows and watched, which was not heroism, but was also not nothing witnesses, at least. See, people who had seen what happened and carried the seeing. See, communities are not innocent or guilty the way individuals are. See, they are composed of individual choices that aggregate into something that looks like a choice, but is more like a weather pattern, a result of many small forces moving in proximity, producing outcomes no single person fully intended. See, Ash Hollow was not Orson Vane. It was also not the town it should have been when Martha Bellamy stood in her yard with 7 children and nobody moved. See, she could hold both of those things. She was not a woman who required her feelings to be simple. See, they went down to Ash Hollow 12 days after the storm, when the South Pass had settled enough for the wagon, and the sky was the specific hard blue of a Colorado February that has decided to behave itself temporarily. See, Spade had come up 3 days prior and been briefed on the ridge routine with the thorough, patient detail of a man who does not want to discover he's missed something when he's alone on a mountain with 4 children under the age of 11 and a 2-year-old with opinions. See, the party going down was Martha, Calder, Thomas, Clara, and Ruth, who had presented such a coherent practical case for her inclusion. See, centered on her need to do a first-hand inventory assessment of the mine property, that Martha had simply said yes and moved on. See, Ben had initially wanted to come, and had been redirected by Calder with the information that someone responsible needed to help Spade maintain the rock collection's classified integrity in Martha's absence. See, which Ben had received with the seriousness it apparently deserved. See, the road down from the ridge was manageable, but not pleasant packed snow over frozen ruts, the kind of road that requires the driver to pay continuous attention and rewards inattention with a wheel in a ditch. See, Calder drove. Martha sat beside him. See, behind them, Thomas and Clara had achieved a truce with the confined space and the cold, and Ruth was reviewing her list of questions, which had grown over the storm days, to fill both sides of her flour sack paper. See, they reached the Ash Hollow Road in the early afternoon. See, Martha had not seen the town since the morning she'd walked away from it behind a gray horse. See, it looked the same and different, in the way places look when you've left them under significant circumstances smaller. Somehow, the buildings shorter than memory had made them, the street narrower. See, the same planked sidewalks, the same general layout, but with the slightly diminished quality of a place that has stopped being the whole world and become merely a location. See, Vane's office was visible from the street, the gold letters on the second-floor window still there, but the window itself dark. See, there was a different name on the street-level door, temporary, painted over what had been there before, not yet fully committed. See, people noticed them. Of course they did. Ash Hollow was not a large town, and a wagon containing Martha Bellamy and Calder Rusk and 3 Bellamy children was not something that arrived without being seen. See, Martha felt the attention without meeting it directly, in the peripheral way you feel a room's awareness without looking at each face in it. See, she was not afraid of it. That was the thing she noticed first. The thing that would stay with her. She was not afraid. See, she had been afraid the last time she walked this street. Afraid in the specific way of someone who is losing and knows it and has no clear path. See, that was gone. What remained in its place was something steadier, less comfortable but more stable. See, she knew what she was now in relation to this town, and what she was not beholden to it. See, Warren Gould's office was in the building that had formerly housed two of the now resigned council members. See, a fact that Gould himself acknowledged with the dry practicality of a man who has been cleaning up other people's arrangements for long enough to find the irony boring rather than pointed. See, he was a compact, direct man in his late 40s, sandy-haired, with the careful language of a bureaucrat who has learned that precise words prevent problems later. See, he shook Martha's hand with a firmness that communicated professional respect rather than social warmth, which was exactly the right register. See, he shook Calder's hand and held it a beat longer. "I've read the account of the Ridge attack," he said. "See, you had 12 men come at you. We had 12 men come at us," Calder said. See, he said it without inflection, just a small correction of the pronoun, and Gould glanced at Martha with the briefest acknowledgement of the correction's accuracy. See, they spent 3 hours in Gould's office going through documents. See, Martha signed 17 separate things, some of which she read fully, and some of which she read the operative portions of with the efficiency of a woman who understands what matters in a legal document and what is structural language. See, Calder witnessed signatures and provided his own statement about Silas's visits to the Ridge in writing, a statement he made with the careful precision of someone aware that his words were going into a formal record. See, Ruth sat in the corner with her list and asked Gould 3 questions that were so specific and structurally sound that Gould had looked up after the second one with an expression suggesting he was revising. See, his understanding of who exactly he was dealing with. See, he answered all 3 in full. Thomas and Clara waited outside. See, when Martha came out, she found them standing together on the sidewalk across the street from Vane's dark office window, not talking, just standing with the particular quality of siblings, sharing a thing they don't have words for yet. See, she stood beside them for a moment. "It's real," Thomas said. See, not a question. "It's real," she confirmed. He nodded once, in the Silas way, and looked at the street, and Martha could see him doing the thing she'd watched him do all winter, adding new information to the picture he was building. See, adjusting the structure to accommodate it, continuing forward. See, she put her hand briefly on his shoulder. He let it stay. See, they went to look at the Bellamy property that afternoon, the homestead where they had lived, which had sat empty since the day they'd left for the Ridge. See, the legal hold meant nothing had been touched, which meant it was cold and closed up and dusty and smaller than memory, in the way that places always are when you return to them with a different scale of experience. See, Thomas walked through the rooms with the face that was very controlled and not entirely successful at it. See, Clara found the thing she'd left behind, a piece of sewing in a basket, still in the needle, and held it for a moment before putting it in her coat pocket. See, Ruth went directly to the kitchen and began an inventory that Martha did not interrupt. See, Martha stood in the room where she'd found the notice on the table, and she stood there for a while. See, this had been her life. See, 14 years of marriage and 7 children, and the specific texture of ordinary days, the stove that ran hot on the left side, the window that stuck in damp weather, the floorboard near the back door that announced everyone's movements. See, she had been happy here. Not always, not without difficulty, not without the particular grinding work of poverty managed carefully over years. See, but happy in the fundamental sense of a person whose life contains the things that matter to them. See, she was not going to live here again. She understood that standing in the room. See, not because the house was inadequate, not because the memory was too heavy, but because she had built something else on a mountain that was hers in a different way, hers because she'd built it rather than inherited it. See, hers because of work and choice, and an agreement made in a town square that had become, over winter and siege and storm and conversation by firelight, something she had not initially aimed for and was not going to pretend she had. See, she was going to keep both things. The property, the children's inheritance, The silver beneath the ground that Silas had died to protect. See, and the ridge and the cabin and the man who had ridden out of the fog. See, she was big enough to hold both. She had always been big enough. See, the meeting with the territorial investigators happened the following morning. See, there were two of them, a senior investigator named Cass and a younger one whose name Martha did not retain because he mostly took notes, and they were professional in the particular way of men who do difficult work and have learned to do it without performance. See, they sat across from Martha and Calder at a table in Gould's office and asked questions that were precise and sequenced. And Martha answered them in the same way she had answered Calder's unasked question the night at the overhang, directly, see, without embellishment, with the things she knew stated as known and the things she believed stated as believed. See, Cass listened with the focused, still quality of a man who is building something from what he hears and does not want any of the materials to be vague. See, at the end of the session, he leaned back in his chair and looked at Martha with an expression that was neither warm nor cold, but was, she thought, genuine. See, Mrs. Rusk, he said, I want to tell you that the evidence in this case is, he paused, choosing substantial. See, I can't tell you how it concludes. I can tell you that Silas Bellamy's death is not going to remain classified as an accident. See, Martha sat with that for a moment. She had known it. Calder had told her. The map had told her. The pattern of everything had told her. See, but having a territorial investigator say it in a government office was different. See, it was the moment a thing stops being what you know and becomes what the world acknowledges. See, thank you, she said. Thank you, he said. And he meant it in the specific way of someone who needed what she'd brought and knows it. See, Orson Vane was held in the county facility 3 streets away. See, Martha did not go to see him. She had thought about it, briefly, in the abstract way you think about things you're not going to do. Imagined the gold-lettered door and the precise face and what she would say or not say. See, and then she had decided that she had nothing to say to Orson Vane that the investigators weren't already saying more effectively, and that giving him any portion of her attention was a resource allocation she wasn't willing to make. See, she had children to get back to. They stayed in Ash Hollow 2 days. See, on the second day, she went to see 3 people. The first was Tom Garrett. See, she found him at the feed store, behind the counter, and he looked up when she came in and went very still, in the way of a man who has been expecting something for a while and is not certain of its shape. See, Martha, he said. Tom, she said. He looked at the counter. See, I know I should have, he started. You gave $12, she said. See, I know what that cost you. And I know you knew it wasn't enough and you gave it anyway. She looked at him. See, I'm not here for an apology. I'm here because you're someone in this town who did something instead of nothing, and I wanted you to know that I know that. See, he looked up. He had the face of a man receiving something he hadn't been sure he deserved, which is an uncomfortable thing to receive, and also, sometimes, a necessary one. See, your children, he said. They're well? They're well, she said. See, all 7. He nodded. He pressed his lips together. See, he said, I'm glad. See, and meant it. See, and she could see that he meant it. See, and she left. See, the second was Pastor Hale's widow, Eleanor, who opened her door and saw Martha and said nothing, just stepped back and held it open, which was the right thing to do. See, they sat in Eleanor's kitchen and drank coffee that was better than anything Martha had had since leaving Ash Hollow, and Eleanor asked about each child by name and remembered the names correctly, all 7 in order. See, you remembered, Martha said. They're your children, Eleanor said. See, of course I remembered. Martha looked at the woman across the kitchen table, 70 years old, soft-faced, with the particular steadiness of someone who has lived long enough to know which things are worth holding on to. See, she had pressed Martha's hand and said she would pray, which had felt inadequate in the moment. See, it felt different now, not because prayer had done something, but because Eleanor had remembered 7 names in order, which was its own kind of holding on. See, come up to the ridge in the spring, Martha said. See, when the pass is easier. Bring your cookpot, the one with the handle you told me about. See, Eleanor's face did something complicated and resolved into something simple. See, I will, she said. I genuinely will. The third visit was one she hadn't planned. See, She was crossing the main street toward the wagon when she saw him, a man she recognized only because of the badge, the young deputy who had been the one approaching Thomas in the yard, the one she'd told she would put through the fence. See, he was coming from the opposite direction, and he saw her at the same moment she saw him. See, he stopped. She stopped. A moment in the middle of Ash Hollow's main street, the two of them 4 feet apart in the February cold. See, he was younger than she'd processed, at the time 23, maybe, with the uncertain quality she'd noticed before, the quality of someone who took the job for reasons that didn't fully survive the experience of doing it. See, he took his hat off. An old-fashioned gesture, slightly awkward. See, Mrs. Rusk, he said. Deputy, she said. He held the hat in both hands. See, I want to. I should have. He stopped. He started again with the effortful quality of someone saying something they've been practicing and find harder in person than in preparation. See, I knew the debt wasn't right, he said. I didn't know why I knew. See, it didn't feel right, and I followed the order anyway, and I've been thinking about that since. See, Martha looked at him, at the young face with its discomfort sitting on it visibly unmanaged. See, he wasn't performing contrition for her benefit, he was reporting an ongoing internal experience. See, the specific trouble of a person who has done something that doesn't match who they thought they were and is still working out what to do with that information. See, what are you going to do about it? She asked, not harshly. See, genuinely. He blinked. Ma'am? You knew it wasn't right and you followed the order, she said. See, that's information about yourself. What you do with it next is the part that actually matters. She looked at him steadily. See, I'm not the one to tell you what that is. But I'd suggest you spend some time with the question. See, he was quiet for a moment. See, yes, ma'am, he said. See, and she believed he meant it. See, she walked on. See, behind her, she heard him put his hat back on, and she thought about what it costs a person to confront the gap between who they are and who they intended to be, and she thought it was a cost worth paying, and she hoped he'd keep paying it. See, and then she put him out of her mind because she had a wagon to get to and a mountain to return to. See, they were back on the ridge before dark. The reunion with the younger children had the specific, unself-conscious warmth of people who are genuinely glad to see each other. Ben's account of the rock collection's status during their absence. Stable. See, with 2 new additions from the woodshed yard, classification pending. Nell's immediate requirement that Martha pick her up and hold her for an extended period, Daniel and Joseph's competitive and contradictory accounts of the 4 days with Spade, see, who appeared to have maintained order through the application of patience and the strategic deployment of the mule story. See, Spade left the following morning with compensation and the slightly dazed quality of a man who has spent 4 days with 4 children under 11 and survived it and is not entirely certain how. See, that night, after supper, after the younger children were in their bunks, and the sounds of the cabin had settled into its nighttime register, Martha sat with Calder at the table and told him about the 3 visits. See, he listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had come to understand about him. He was a genuinely good listener, not in the performed way of people who are waiting for their turn to speak, see, but in the actual way of someone who takes in what is said and considers it before responding. See, when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The deputy, he said. See, you think he'll change? I don't know, she said honestly. See, I think he's asking the right question. Whether he keeps asking it is up to him. See, most people don't, he said. No, she agreed. Most people answer it once with something comfortable and move on. See, but some people stay with it. She looked at the fire. See, Silas was someone who stayed with it. Every time he did something he wasn't certain was right, he went back to it. See, turned it over. That's part of why he found the mine. He was the kind of man who keeps looking at things until he sees what's actually there. See, Calder was quiet for a long moment. He trusted the right people, he said. See, not many of them, but the right ones. He trusted me, Martha said. See, and he trusted you a little, which turned out to be enough. See, he trusted his own judgment, Calder said. That's the harder thing. See, when everything around you is saying the other thing. See, she looked at him, at the scar and the gray eyes and the hands on the table that she had watched do careful, useful work for months now. See, you do that too, she said. Trust your own judgment when everything is saying the other thing. See, I've been wrong, he said, more than once. So was Silas, she said. See, so am I. That's not the part that matters. He looked at her. See, the part that matters, she said, is whether you keep doing it anyway. See, keep looking at the thing until you see what's actually there. She held his gaze. See, you did that, with Vane's pattern, with the letters, with the rider. See, nobody told you to look at it. You looked because the looking was right. See, he was quiet for a long time. The fire moved between them. See, outside the ridge was quiet with the deep quiet of a winter night. See, I'm not a man who says things well, he said finally. See, I know that. 7 years alone doesn't improve it. See, I've noticed, she said without unkindness. I want to say something that I'm going to say badly, he said. See, she waited. When my wife and daughter died, he said, I decided not consciously, or not all at once, that the appropriate thing was to stop needing things. See, people specifically. I was good at it. I got better at it. He looked at his hands. See, the ridge made it easy. Everything I needed was manageable. See, I could account for all of it. Nothing was outside my control except the weather and the grizzlies, and I had systems for those. He paused. See, then I sent a letter to a government office about a man's acquisition pattern, and a miner left a map in my cabin, and a woman stood in front of her son in a town square, and he stopped. See, Martha waited. I had stopped expecting anything to matter to me, he said. See, the way it turned out to matter. It was the most he had said at once in all the months she'd known him. See, she could hear the rust in it, not the rust dishonesty, but the rust of words used infrequently, ideas carried long in silence before being put into language. See, she said, I know. She said, I wasn't expecting it either. See, she said, I'm glad it happened anyway. He looked up at her. See, the expression she'd been learning to read that had been opening slowly over months the way ice opens in spring, not dramatically, not all at once, but in a process that is happening even when you can't see the movement. See, so am I, he said. They were not people who rushed things. See, they were not people who performed the emotion before they'd arrived at it. See, what was between them had been built in the way things are built on a mountain slowly, with available materials, in conditions that were not always cooperative. See, with the understanding that what you build has to actually hold weight, or it's not worth building. See, it held weight. That was enough. That was more than enough. See, spring came to Blackthorn Ridge in the way of mountain springs, which is not the gentle progression of valley springs, but more of an argument, snow still on the upper elevations in late April. See, and then a week of temperatures that convinced you it was over, and then another storm, and then finally, definitively, the morning you step outside, and the air has made a decision. See, that morning came in early May. The formal investigation concluded in March. See, Orson Vane was convicted on 11 counts, which included fraud, falsification of property records, bribery of 5 public officials, see, and the count that had taken the longest to build and was the most consequential conspiracy in the wrongful death of Silas Bellamy. See, the conviction on that last count was not as clean as Martha had wanted. See, the evidence was substantial, but the mechanism was indirect. Vane had hired, instructed, and paid. But the man who had actually entered the mine that night had not been found. See, the judge noted this limitation in his sentencing remarks. See, Vane received 23 years, which meant, at his age, the remainder of his functional life behind the walls of the territorial facility in Pueblo. See, it was not everything. Martha had known it wouldn't be. See, the law is a structure built by people, which means it reflects people's limitations as much as their intentions, and what it can prove and what actually happened are not always the same perimeter. See, but Vane was gone. The structure he'd built, the forged debts, the bribed officials, the manufactured proceedings had been dismantled publicly and completely. See, and the people who had participated in it had lost their positions and in 2 cases faced their own charges. See, Judge Ferris retired under pressure and moved to relatives in New Mexico and was never heard of publicly again, which Martha thought was probably its own kind of sentence. See, the Bellamy silver claim was formally established in April. See, Martha had hired a mining engineer recommended by Commissioner Aldridge, a woman's choice which produced some commentary in Ash Hollow, and which Martha noted and filed away under the category of things she was done adjusting herself for. See, The engineer, a compact, sun-weathered man named Fredericks, who had spent 15 years in the Colorado mines and had opinions about everything, and kept most of them professional, assessed the vein and provided a report that Ruth read before Martha did and annotated in 3 places. He's underestimating the northeast extension, Ruth said, at 9 years old, with the confidence of someone who has spent 4 months studying a sketch and asking questions. He's working from surface data, Martha said. Once we sink the first shaft, we'll know more. When do we sink the first shaft? Summer, Martha said. After the thaw is fully done. Fredericks is coming back in June. Ruth nodded and went back to her annotations. She would, in the years that followed, have a direct hand in the management of the Bellamy Rusk mining operation, which was what Martha called it from the beginning, both names. No hyphenation hierarchy. Because both had been necessary and both would be remembered. Ruth's capacity for financial and logistical analysis applied over years, and with education that Martha and Calder made certain she got, would eventually make her one of the more formidable figures in territorial mining administration. A fact that would surprise no one who had seen her at 8 years old, with her flour sack paper and her precise questions. But that was forward. In the spring. She was 9. And annotating a mining report. And that was exactly right. The formal wedding took place in May. Not in Ash Hollow. Martha had no interest in performing the occasion for a town that had needed convincing, but on the ridge itself, in the yard of the cabin in front of the cliff face. With Gould acting in his official capacity, and Spade as witness, and all 7 children in their best clothes, which for the twins meant their second cleanest clothes, with the worst of the mud removed. It was cold. It was May on the ridge, which meant cold in the morning, and the possibility of warmth in the afternoon if the sun cooperated. The sun cooperated partially. The ceremony was brief. Martha had written what she wanted to say, and she said it. And it was honest and plain and made no claims about forever that she wasn't prepared to stand behind. Calder had not written anything, but when the moment came, he said, with the directness she had learned was simply how he communicated, I am going to be here. I intend to keep being here. That's what I've got. It was, Martha thought, exactly right. Nell carried the carved wooden horse through the entire ceremony. After, when Gould had gone and Spade had stayed for the meal, and the children had been released from the requirement of stillness and were variously dispersed across the yard, in the returning energy of people who have been formal for a constrained period, Thomas came and stood beside Martha. She was looking out at the ridge, at the territory she could see from the yard, the approach trail, the granite cliff above, the sky that had decided to be blue after all. Pa would have liked him, Thomas said. Martha considered this. Considered Silas, who had been warm where Calder was contained, talkative where Calder was quiet, given to laughter in a way Calder had to be coaxed toward, who had been her husband for 14 years and the father of 7 children, and a man who looked at things until he saw what was actually there, and who had, in his last careful act, put a map in the hands of the right person. Pa would have trusted his judgment, she said. That's what Pa did, trusted the judgment of people who had earned it. She looked at her son. Silas trusted yours, you know. He said it to me a year before he died. Said Thomas will know what's right, and he'll do it even when it costs him. Thomas's jaw moved. He was 17 now, nearly as tall as Calder, with his father's eyes and something in the set of his face that was beginning to be his own thing rather than an inheritance. He was going to be his own kind of person. She could see it forming, the way you can see a person becoming themselves if you watch carefully enough. I didn't always know what was right, he said. Nobody does, she said. That's not the same as not looking. He was quiet. Then I'm going to go down to the property in June. Help Fredericks with the initial survey work. If you think that's the right thing. I think that's the right thing, she said. He nodded in the Silas way, and went to join Daniel and Joseph, who were doing something in the woodshed that was probably inadvisable and certainly involving significant noise. Martha stayed where she was for a moment longer. She thought about a morning in November, standing on a cold porch in her dead husband's coat, reading a notice that said 7 days. See, she thought about $89. She thought about Garrett's eyes and Eleanor's hand and the flat white sky that had been promising snow. See, she thought about a woman who had been told, in all the ways a town knows how to tell a woman such things, that she was too much, too large, too poor, too loud, too difficult, too many children. See, too little compliance with the shape that the space preferred to accommodate. See, she thought about what it had taken to remain herself through all of that. See, not to become smaller or quieter or more manageable. See, to hold the ground of her own nature while everything around her insisted the ground wasn't hers to hold. See, people talk about survival as if it's the passive thing, as if surviving is simply the absence of destruction. See, it isn't. Survival, the real kind, requires active maintenance. See, you have to keep showing up as yourself when the pressure is to stop. See, you have to keep making the decisions that a smaller version of yourself would avoid. See, you have to keep standing in front of your children with an iron poker when the calculation says you're outnumbered. See, and sometimes not always, not on demand, not as a reward for the effort, something comes out of the fog on a gray horse and throws gold on a table and says a thing that changes everything. See, Martha Rusk did not believe the mountain man was sent. See, she did not believe in the kind of universe that sends things. See, she believed in people making choices, and in the weight of those choices accumulating over time into something that resembles grace, but is actually just the compounded consequence of people deciding, repeatedly, see, to do the harder right thing rather than the easier wrong one. See, Calder had decided. She had decided. Silas, in his last careful act, had decided. See, even Harlan Spade, riding a roan mare through a winter mountain pass with a package he'd been asked to deliver, had decided. See, decisions made in the dark, without guarantee, without visible result, and then one day you look up and there it is. See, she heard his boots on the porch. She didn't turn around. See, he came and stood beside her, looking at the same ridge she was looking at. See, below them the approach trail was clear. Above them the cliff face was dry in the May sun. See, around them, the sound of 7 children being themselves, in the specific unself-conscious way of children who are safe. See, Ruth wants to know, he said, whether the northeast extension of the vein would change the shaft placement in Frederick's plan. See, what do you think? Martha said. I think she's probably right about the northeast extension, he said. See, and I think Fredericks should know that before June. See, write him a letter, Martha said. Include Ruth's annotations. See, she's 9, he said. Yes, Martha said, and she's right. See, a pause. I'll write the letter, he said. They stood together on the porch of the cabin that had been his and was now theirs, built against the cliff face of a ridge that had been his refuge and was now their home. See, looking out at the territory that had tried to take her family and had failed, and the morning was cold and clear and entirely ordinary and absolutely not. See, years later, when people in the territory talked about the Bellamy Rusk operation, about Martha Rusk specifically, about the woman who had turned a fraudulent foreclosure into one of the most carefully run mining concerns in the region. See, who had established wage protections for mine workers in an era when no one was establishing such things. See, who had raised 7 children to independent adulthood on a mountain and sent them out into the world with clear eyes and the knowledge of what a family could be when it decided to be one people. See, often framed it as a story about a woman who overcame. See, Martha, when she heard this framing, always said the same thing. See, she said, I didn't overcome anything. I just kept being myself long enough for the world to catch up. See, and then she usually went back to what she was doing, because she had a mind to run and a husband who needed reminding that his shoulder wound from 4 years ago still pulled in cold weather and he should not be lifting that particular beam alone. See, and Ruth had sent another annotated report from Denver that required a response, and Ben's rock classification system had finally been formally published in a territorial natural history journal. See, a fact that produced in Ben the specific quiet satisfaction of a person who has been serious about something all along and is now simply confirmed. And Clara had written from Glenwood, where she was living her own particular life. See, the one that turned out to have more room in it than 14 years of second motherhood had let her see. And Thomas was coming up from the property for the weekend with his wife, Silas's granddaughter already on the way. See, and the cabin needed the extra beds made up, and there was a storm coming from the northwest that Calder had read in the morning sky. See, there was always a storm coming from somewhere. There was always work to do. See, and Martha Rusk, the formidable matriarch of Blackthorn Ridge, the woman who was too large and too much, and too poor and too loud, and too everything that the world tried to make into a reason, Martha Rusk rolled up her sleeves and did it. See, as she always had, as she always would.